The children of day and night have always respected and despised each other. Their battles that began in the age of myths were transferred to humans, and they still continue in our time. They show us the bank building where the explosions take place, and someone says even the ugly villains living in hell dream of heaven. It was a man posing as a clown, and soon he announces to all the police officers surrounding him that they will receive a terrible and exciting greeting in heaven because Ralph's show is starting. He himself was standing on a large ball that was in the air, and it suddenly began to fall on people. The officer gives the order to all police officers to retreat, and then Ralph strikes the ball on the ground, resulting in a large-scale explosion, and the skill was called Death Ball. After that, only a clown could stand on his feet, and he declares that he likes this view and this wonderful show. It was an A-rank villain named Ralph the Clown. His class was a summoner, and his skill was chaos. Suddenly, one of the policemen raises a gun at the clown, trying to aim at him, and then Ralph goes berserk. He creates some kind of strange thing with strong energy in his hand and says that despite the situation there will always be some kids who haven't figured out what's what yet, after which he wishes him a good road and uses his skill called pin shot. After that, he laughed and there was an explosion behind his back, which brought him great pleasure. At this moment, inside the bank, his henchmen are robbing the bank. They are shouting for money to be brought to them and whether they want a hole in the head. They wanted to rob another bank. Immediately after that, the school bus arrives and Ralph the Clown gives the command to his people that it's time for them to go home and orders them to pack backpacks. His people heard this and immediately ran in the direction of the bus. One of the clown's people gave him a bag and he grabbed a couple of bills from there and started sniffing. As a result, he was pleased with the sweet smell of money. He uses them to fill Ralph land with fear and horror. While the clown was enjoying the money, two of his other people got on the bus with a woman and a child. One of them knocks on the door and orders it to be opened immediately, after which they open it, and a man in a black mask was sitting at the wheel. The bandit asked why the door was blocked and then the driver replied, "It's not a sports car but a school bus, the doors are slowly opening here." Then he noticed a woman and decides to ask what kind of woman is behind him, to which the bandit replies that she is a hostage. Then the driver also notices the child and also asks about her. They explain to him that this is the princess daughter of the governor. And to be precise, this is a mother and daughter and they will be given an excellent ransom. The driver did not answer anything and just watched as they were brought into the bus. Suddenly the woman breaks out and asks the criminals to let her daughter go. But the bandits did not listen and, grabbing her by the hand, ordered her to be silent. Soon they took her away from her daughter, who was hysterical and called her mother, and the mother herself tried to escape to her. The thug who was holding the little girl told her to be quiet and reminded her if she did not obey her uncle, he would do something bad. Suddenly, someone turns to him calling him a jerk. It was the driver who ordered them to release the hostages, but the guys understood and just watched. Realizing that talking won't help here, the driver grabs one guy by the face and he starts screaming in pain. In the end, the man again asks to release the hostages. Meanwhile, another bandit throws the woman away and decides to attack without fully understanding what is happening now, but the driver instantly reacts to this. There are people with special abilities in this world. They awaken them and commit crimes under the control of their own desires, and those who have the blood of the child of the night are called villains. As an example of this, we are shown the clown Ralph, who ordered his people to come back and celebrate to the fullest, and they will triple the barbecue. Everyone supported Ralph and followed him straight to the bus, and as soon as he touches the bus, someone immediately throws one of his people out the window. At this moment, we are shown that there are still people with superpowers who are fighting against villains. In parallel, the driver gets off the bus after the second bandit. Then he throws the body in front of the clown, and the clown angrily asks who this madman is. After hearing the answer, Ralph began to get angry, because he just came to take out the trash and that's all. Those who stand on the side of society and receive support, those who have the blood of a child of the day, are called psychers. Who our hero was pretending to be a driver, but in fact he was an S-rank psycher named Cashin Lee. His class was a striker, and his skill was fire. Soon our hero greets Ralph the Clown, remembering that they have not seen each other for a whole year, and he is very glad to see him after such a long separation. The clown is shocked to see Cashin and does not understand what this man is doing here and where did he come from. Meanwhile, someone in Cashin's headphones says how he does not understand what the guy is doing and this is no longer according to plan. Why he climbed there alone was also not understood, but our hero takes and simply destroys the earphone by holding it in his hand. After that, he announces that no one will bother them now and suggests starting the fun, at which point the whole clown gang and himself were very puzzled and generally scared. Then the guy tells them he won't even be able to sort them, because there will be nothing left of scum like them. At this moment, he gathers fire in his palm and is going to deal with everyone quickly and without hassle. After a while, we are taken to the streets of a big city. The news reports that there was a robbery on South 5th Avenue yesterday afternoon, was criticized for using excessive force. The Human Rights Commission officially asked Lampas to participate, saying that the first-class psyker Cashin, who used ruthless violence, needs appropriate punishment. Why are they moving to Lampas's Washington office? Lampas is an international organization of psychers. There was a woman with pink hair and drinking tea in the office. It was an S-rank psycher Tuffen Schiller. Her class was enlightened. Her skill was light. She asked our hero if he was a villain by any chance? Cashin, on the other hand, squeezed a paper cup explaining to her what she herself knows. He would not contact them. However, she asks him, has he ever thought about the consequences? Because of his disobedience, he missed Ralph and turned the public against the organization. But the guy tells her that he had hostages. She does not let him finish and replies that then he should have been even more careful. The safety of the hostages is their top priority, but the guy thought he could save them, which he told Ms. Schiller. However, she answers him that he needs to act like a psyker, in other words, to act rationally and calmly, then adds in a raised tone that you can't do the hell out of your head. Let him just see what they got in the end. Are his actions different from the actions of the villains? He then tells him that he is on probation, and she hopes that he understands what this means and what will happen if he screws up. Already walking down the hall, he gets mad at her and calls her a witch, after which he wonders how Jeff even managed to make friends with her. Just as he decides to put his thoughts in order, his phone rang, and it was a call from Jeff. The guy picks up the phone and asks Jeff what he wanted. And then Jeff asks him to come right now, and the guy asks where exactly he should go, after which Rhodes hears in response. This is very surprising to our hero, since this is in Greece, and he was in America. After a while, we are shown Rhodes Airport, and then the city itself. Cashin decides to have tea at one of the local cafes and remembers that thanks to Jeff, he has a lot of good memories. After that, he wonders when was the last time they saw each other. He further assumes that it was 6 months ago, after which he became a little depressed, remembering all this, and at the same time recalls the orphanage at the National Assembly. Inside, in one of the classrooms, we were shown a toy that moved, and the children were delighted with this sight. They looked attentively and rejoiced, as if they had seen magic. Our hero was very young then and asked if the toy was alive? But young Jeff replied that, of course not, it was just a toy that moved thanks to his strength. And all the children admired this power, after which Jeff asked the guys if the toy really looked like it was alive. And then our young hero asks Jeff if he will become a psyker, and if he will kill villains, and it will even be shown on TV? Jeff doesn't even know, because he thinks he has a pretty useless power. But our young hero thinks the opposite and tells his older friend that she's just amazing. Then Cashin remembers that all this was before he was adopted in the USA. Then there really was a time when he did not know any fears. It was a good time for him. Sometime later on the same day, but in the evening, our hero was standing near a cafe that had been closed for a long time. He looks at the time on the phone and notices that Jeff is already late, and besides, he is not picking up the phone, which makes him nervous. Jeff suddenly appears behind Cashin, but he didn't look well. Then the guy turns to him and sees that Jeff is terribly injured and covered in blood. He runs up to him and asks what's wrong with him. Did the villain hurt him? It's hard for Jeff to talk, but he still tries to say that he shouldn't have called this guy. Cashin doesn't understand what he means. Jeff then asks for a strange locket without explanation, but the guy asks him to explain everything first. Our hero wants to know what happened to him, but there is no time to explain, and Jeff simply replies that he is fine. But suddenly after that, he spits out blood, and the guy is shocked by everything that is happening. Jeff realizes something and immediately asks Cashin to run away, taking the medallion, and if he does not do this, he will also be in danger. But our hero does not listen and does not understand what he is carrying. Then he decides to call an ambulance, and at that moment a strange man in a mask and with a katana in his hands appears. Jeff was very shocked, and Cashin didn't understand who he was at all. Unexpectedly, Jeff pushes our hero, and the masked man immediately reacts to this, as a result of which the unknown blows off the head of our hero's friend. The guy saw all this and was shocked. Suddenly the whole world froze and turned gray, after which he looks at the severed head of his close friend, while the killer tries to escape. But Cashin notices this and is overcome with anger, after which he breaks down and runs after the killer. After a while, near the lighthouse, he catches up with the masked man. Catching his breath after the chase, Cashin asks if this is some kind of revenge or someone hired him? But the guy doesn't need any arguments, since he's going to die by his hand right now anyway, and the fire is starting to gather in his hand. The criminal answers him that the guy is still sharp-tongued, and addresses our hero by name. This surprises the guy very much, because the killer turned out to be Jack, a man with a katana and a patch over one eye. He was an S-rank psyker named Jack Khalid, his class was Knight, and his skill was Strength. Our hero couldn't formulate a single thought out of anger, and was just shaking with hatred. However, Jack was calm and replied to the young psyker that he had only eliminated the traitor of the organization, but the guy did not believe in this nonsense. Suddenly, a woman's voice is heard behind Cashin, who says that this is true and Jeff killed their colleague. There were witnesses and evidence. Lampus confirmed everything and gave permission. It was an S-rank psyker girl named Layla. Her class was enlightened, and her skill was cold. Jack tells Cashin that he doesn't want to be considered a traitor either, so he demands to tell everything that Jeff managed to tell him. After that, they stood and waited for our hero's answer. Exhaling, he answers them that in all the 10 years that Jeff was a psyker, he did not kill a single person, and they say that he would do this to his colleague? Lila warns that there are 2 other top-notch psychers nearby, so let her think with her own head, and not be stupid. Jack adds if he is a real psyker, let him be reasonable and give one last warning. Unexpectedly for Jack, our hero agrees and says that they are right. Since he is a psyker, then he must act like a psyker, that is, rationally and calmly. At this moment Layla and Jack were surprised, since the guy decided to kill them and ran straight at Jack. The man pulls out a katana and strikes, but the guy dodges him and strikes with his fiery fist from below. Jack manages to block it, and not without difficulty. As a result, the knight flies away and gathers energy into a katana for a new blow. He is going to use the soul of the sword. Meanwhile, behind Cashin, the girl is also gathering her strength and is going to use the blast of cold. But the guy doesn't care. He completely succumbs to anger and shouts at them to start already, as a result of which they both land their punches. But Cashin calmly blocks them. Then he immediately intends to strike back, but a piece of ice flies at him like a bullet, and our hero falls to his knees. He realizes that Layla is also a sniper. Then the girl tells him to surrender. If he does not obey, they will have to eliminate him as well. But the guy is stubborn and does not listen. He collects fire in his hand and immediately throws it at 2 psychers. It was the hellfire that provoked the big explosion. While Cashin was not in sight, he decides to run away, this time thinking that they will see each other again, and then he jumps into the water. But suddenly another shard flies straight into his chest, which he did not even notice, after which he begins to fall. He fell into the water and, already sinking into the depths, thinks that he cannot die so easily. He needs to avenge Jeff. At this moment, the locket that Jeff gave him before his death begins to glow, as a result of which we are transported to the toilet. The teenagers could be heard arguing in the toilet. They claimed that someone was no longer breathing, and could not believe that he had died, after which they ran away. Then some boy lying with his head in the toilet began to move and suddenly got out of the toilet, after which he began to put his breathing in order. Then Cashin tries to figure out where he is, because then he fell off a cliff and what happened to his voice. Directing his gaze at the mirror in the toilet, he was surprised. He touched his face with trembling hands and could not understand who it was and what was going on here at all. It's not him, and in general it's impossible. Why does he look like a teenager and has the body of a teenager too? He decides to wash his face and thinks it's a dream, just a dream. After washing his face and changing his hairstyle a little, he looks in the mirror and thinks that he knows that this is not the case. He did not understand how it happened and why then the memory of the former owner of the body flows into his head. Now he was Kwon Kong and he was in Korea, after which he wondered how it happened, and what kind of memories are these? Suddenly, someone spoke to Cashin, noticing that he had woken up. Then our hero got scared without realizing who was talking to him, and then dark energy, which was a spirit, came out of the medallion. The spirit introduced himself by the name of Moros. He is a very ancient noble spirit. This shocked Cashin and he did not understand what appeared in front of him, calling him, "What is it?" and why he got out of the necklace. But the spirit replies that he is not, what, but a Moros. And then he continues that besides our hero has a lot of questions, which means he wants to find answers. After which it turns out that it was Moros who brought Cashin back to life. After he died, Moros said this several times in a row. And then the spirit notices that our hero quickly mastered Korean, to which the guy replies, he lived in Korea before he was adopted in the United States. This upset Cashin. He could hardly believe that he had died and then resurrected in a new body, and considers it complete nonsense. Then the spirit explains that Jeff gave the necklace away and he did it to protect it, which surprised our hero. He was thinking about what Moros had said, and was what Jeff had said then true? Then he exhales and decides to ask the spirit, did he say that Jeff was looking for something? Namely, some kind of iron wooden sword, after which the spirit clarifies that it is a sword of destruction. This sword was created back in the era of myths. Then Cashin asks how Moros knows that the sword was made so long ago. Then Moros answers, it's because he's an ancient spirit, but the guy thinks it's nonsense. Then Moros answers him, if he doesn't know something, let him slam his mitt and listen. This made the young guy a little mad, who then picked up the phone and asked Moros why he should believe him, and why would he do that. Then the spirit responds, he's actually a victim here, since he had to use half of his power to revive the young guy. Then the guy thinks that the fact that he considers himself a victim is very funny while flipping through the phone. Unexpectedly, he finds something very shocking, namely the news about Cashin. It says that Lampas officially announced the successful completion of the operation to eliminate the famous psyker Lee Cashin, who was convicted of participating in black traffic and money laundering. Meanwhile, first-class psyker Jeff Malik was killed by Cashin during his detention. Many people around the world mourn his death. This angered our hero, who did not understand what kind of nonsense it was, and why did he kill Jeff. His hands started shaking because he couldn't believe it. He would never have touched Jeff. Such news begins to make our hero very angry because Lampas decides to blame the guy for all the crimes, and it makes him more and more angry. As a result, a strange energy begins to come out of Cashin, as he did everything possible to protect people, and Lampas blamed him for all the troubles. Moros asks the guy to calm down, because he is now starting to turn into something else, after which our hero himself begins to feel something. His eyes change, one turned blue, and the second remained yellow. Then a certain pain begins from waking up and Cashin wonders what it is. He looks at his hands and sees how they have changed. They have become black and with claws, as if he was wearing some kind of gloves. After that, we see how he changed completely and some energy was still coming out of him, which shocked our hero and he did not understand what was happening to him. Meanwhile, we are transferred to another place where a group of school hooligans are waiting for someone. One of them is very nervous, but another calms him down saying that the one they are waiting for will be soon. Just after that, the boy in whose body they were waiting came running. The bully with purple hair, who was in charge, tells everyone to look at this boar, while the second with blonde hair considers him a freak. Next, the main one asks if the guy checked what they asked for. He responds positively. He was in that toilet and there was no one there. Then the third bully with glasses on his face asks if the one who checked is sure of this. He answers positively again. Then they ask about the police or ambulance at the scene, but none of them were there. Then the guy with blonde hair became enraged and started shouting at the bespectacled man that he said how Kwon Kanu did not breathe and died. Then the bespectacled man remembers how at that moment he checked and saw that Kwon did not ask the bespectacled man questions, which place he checked Kwon Kanu, and how can he be trusted after that. Then the chief tells him to stop hitting, and it doesn't matter if Kwon is there or not, there is no difference. Then the bespectacled man and the light one asked the main thing, what should they do next? He drank juice from the bag that the fat man brought, and after licking his lips smiled maliciously, answering them that they would find him and finish him off. Some time later, we are returned to Cashin, who is on the roof of the school, and the spirit tells him that all the students go to the roof to be alone. This is an excellent solution. But the guy sent him because he climbed to the roof on the outside of the building, and not through the stairs, and asks why he suddenly became a villain? Then Moros exhales heavily and thinks that he already regrets his choice. Then he begins to explain that the fate of our hero has changed. Since he managed to die and be reborn again, but the owner of his body was destined to awaken as a villain. His new body has the ability to have huge catastrophic consequences. Abruptly Cashin interrupts the spirit, and is shocked by what he says, asks, catastrophic consequences. Did he really take over his fate after being reborn? Moros confirms this, and then our hero begins to laugh at such a fate and says, a high-class psyker has been reborn into a villain and his capabilities have become the capabilities of Cashin. After that, he hits the wall next to him, because it pisses him off and the guy gets furious. He shouts at the spirit, why did he reborn him, for what is all this? Moros tries to calm our hero down, but he doesn't want to hear anything. Moros insists and tells the guy, because he knows himself that the villains are controlled by their desires and right now they are taking over our hero. The evil itself is inside him and the guy is shocked by this news. But now Moros helps him contain this evil. However, the more angry he gets, the stronger the evil inside him. And as soon as he wanted to explain what would happen when evil took possession of him, the guy abruptly stops him and asks him not to talk. After that, he was very saddened by all this and wondered what he should do now. After a couple of seconds of silence, Moros gives him the answer, he must survive. Jeff would have told him that too, but the guy asks what he might know about Jeff. Then the spirit answers him how they talked about Cashin. Jeff is very sorry that he had to involve the guy in this case, and although he felt death approaching, he did not plan to escape. He only wanted our hero to have a chance to survive, as this was his last wish. From this, the guy calmed down, and the spirit tells him that he needs to learn to control himself. But the guy sent him saying that he got tired of giving advice, as it is very annoying. Next, Moros asked the guy if he wanted to regain his human form. After our hero agreed and regained his human form, he turned to the spirit saying, "Here," to him. But Moros corrected him saying, "Do not hear, but the noble ancient spirit of Moros." But Cashin ignored this and asks what he is. What does this ancient noble spirit of his mean? Moros does not believe that the guy is interested in knowing this, but he says that he is interested. He begins to assume, since he knows how to revive people, there may be something else. But the spirit interrupts him, answering that he will find out about it when he finds the sword. The guy calls the sword a piece of metal. And since the conversation turned to this, he decides to ask, does this sword have anything to do with Jeff's murder? Moroi replies how sure he is of this, and immediately at that moment someone called our hero. It was 3 hooligans who found out whether he was dead or not earlier. Then approaching him, the main one starts laughing at him, saying how glad he is to see that the guy is alive. Meanwhile, inside the school in the hallway, all the girls stared at someone and strongly discussed one handsome man. They were delighted with his body. It would be a trainee psyker named Kim Yukin of unknown rank. His class was a striker, and his skill was fire. He was tall with red hair and had a cross earring on his left ear. Suddenly, a man named Lee Dung dials him and the guy answers him asking if something has happened. Then he was talking about some kind of problem while all the girls were watching him. but abruptly he notices something and looks out the window just above the floor where he was. Then he says that he will call back a little later and hangs up the phone, going somewhere in parallel, and meanwhile, in front of the corridor where our hero was on the roof, our hero met with hooligans. They stood and looked at each other, after which our hero remembered them from Kwon Kanu's memories and realized that it was definitely them. Then he turned his attention to the spirit, but Moros calmed him down, saying that only Cashin could see him. Then the hooligans began to say how worried they were about him. Suddenly they would go to jail because of his weak body. Their main one tells Kwon Kan that he pisses him off if he's not dead, so why didn't he come to them right away, walks on the roof here, hides. Unexpectedly for the hooligans, our hero asks rudely, what kind of jerks are they? Then he adds that he is not in the mood at all right now. He does not like to beat children, but apparently it is necessary for educational purposes and simultaneously needs his fists. Moros warns our hero, villains even without transformation have a huge power, which is several times greater than any human. If he loses control of himself, it will be dangerous. But Cashin knows all this. At this moment one of the hooligans comes up and runs over the guy, asking what he just told them. Next, he assumes that the guy completely moved his head, but our hero looked at him like garbage, as a result of which this enraged the light bully and decides to hit the guy in parallel, asking what he was staring at. As a result, without having time to hit our hero himself and gets punched in the face, the other hooligans were shocked by this, since a completely different guy was standing in front of them. He was calm and stood in a fighting stance waiting for the next one, and the first one fell right in front of him, as one blow from our hero knocked him out. The main one was shocked and did not understand where this kid got so much power from. The bespectacled man took off and attacked Cashin, shouting that he was finished for what he had done. But the guy remains calm and keeps his cool, as a result of which the bespectacled man strikes with a bat, but our hero blocks it with his left hand. Immediately after that the guy hits him with his right hand. The bespectacled man immediately loses consciousness, and this plunges the head into even greater shock. He could not believe how our hero put two of them down in one fell swoop. Then Cashin turned his attention to the last bully and asks how their conscience does not gnaw at their actions at all. But the bully does not know what to answer because of the shock, and Cashin asks him why he is silent. But the leader begins to smile sharply and replies that he does not know such a thing as conscience, and he spat on everyone and on their conscience, and they ask if our hero thinks that he cannot cope with him? But the guy, after hearing all this, decides that he does not have a conscience, and since he does not have one, he needs it to appear, and his fist will perfectly help him in this. Next, our hero ran to attack the last bully, and he stood in a stance waiting for him. As soon as he approached, the bully strikes with his right hand, but the guy passes under it and strikes from below on the chin. Immediately after him, he hits in the stomach. From such blows, the bully fell to his knees, and Cashin asks if he has a conscience? But though with difficulty, he still insulted him in response, and then our hero grabs him by the shirt, concluding, apparently, the blow was not strong enough. And then he decides to hit him again, looking at him with a frightening look that alarmed the bully terribly. Suddenly, someone turns to them from the outside asking, "What are they doing?" They looked in the direction from where it was said, and there stood Kim Yukin. This greatly shocked the bully, and our hero lets him go, asking who Kim is and why he gets into their business. Kim asks, will he really beat someone who is weaker than him at times? The bully reacted to this, did not understand. Did talking about a weakling mean him? This enrages him and he stabs him in the back, but our hero reacts and kicks the bully in the stomach from a U-turn, and he flies away. At this moment, Kim grabs Cashin by the shoulder and asks him to stop, but our hero reacts and hits him with an elbow from a U-turn, which surprised the intern. He manages to block the blow with his elbow with his hands, then Cashin strikes a second blow with his hand, but he abruptly moves away, which surprises the guy. As soon as he moves away to the right distance and hits the head with his right foot, but Cashin crouches down and thinks that the guy is very fast. At this moment, Moros turns to our hero and says his opponent is a psyker. If he loses, then everything will come to an end. Cashin was distracted by this, and at that moment Kim strikes, but the guy dodges him, although a cut appeared on his face. Then they both stood in a stand and looked away from each other. Cashin thought, is this kid really a psyker? Abruptly, Kim stops and says that it's enough. If they continue, then it will only get worse for the two of them. Our hero did not understand this. Next, Kim gives him a band-aid and tells him how he got hurt. After that, they looked at each other and Cashin takes the band-aid, then turns around and leaves. Kim looks after him and thinks, he killed 3 of them alone. Does they really have such a strong student at school? Therefore, he felt something and looked at his arm, which was slightly sore from Cashin's blow. Some time later, at the computer club, our hero tried to log into Lampa's account, but nothing worked, as they blocked his account. He guessed it, of course, but things are really terrible. After that, Cashin turns to Moros on the street and asks how he knew that the guy was a psyker. Then the spirit responds he identified it by the waves when he touched it, and then Cashin considers it an interesting ability, but the spirit considers it nothing. If he had considered its color scheme, he would have learned more information, but our hero does not understand how the spirit knows such complex words, to which he responds he is, in fact, an ancient noble spirit who lives and gains knowledge from generations. Next, he suggests that our hero turn into the form of a villain, since it would be better to find out about his capabilities in advance. But the guy doesn't say anything and just froze. Then the spirit thinks that he doesn't really want to eat like that, but he will have to. He needs to understand what the essence of the villain's power is and is further interested in what he needs to do this. Moros explains that the villains come from an inability to control the 5 desires and 7 senses, but the guy thinks he's talking nonsense. The spirit continues and says that in the case of Cashin's, the trigger button is anger, and then the guy thought about it. As a result, he remembers all the events up to this point and begins to get angry, after which he began to scream and promise how he would destroy the entire Lampas. This surprised Moros and he asked what Cashin was doing. The kid replied to this as he shows anger, but the spirit tells him that it is not necessary to yell, you just need to feel the anger itself and that's it. It made our hero very angry, who asked if it was impossible to say it right away. After a while, we were taken to the highway where a blue car was driving and they were talking about villains named Blaster. The maniac, who likes to play with explosives, is said to have been able to arrive illegally at Incheon Airport, and has already been seen in the city today. There was a trainee psyker in the car, Kim Yukin, who read the information and the fact that there were already 102 victims of this villain. And there was another psyker at the wheel, who said that he had no special combat abilities, but his ability to create explosives was incredibly infuriating. It was a B-rank psyker named Lee Dun. His class was Knight, and his skill was Strength. He continued to talk about the villain, saying that he is a psychopath to all this. Then Kim answers him that villains only know how to create problems. Sociopaths who do not know how to control their desires need to catch him before he escapes, and you could also see a great contempt for villains in his eyes. Lee believes that he reacts sharply to all the villains, and then the guy replies that the task of the psychers is to bring justice to them. But Lee still insists that he do it, and the guy just let him watch and learn. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, our hero opened a status panel. Moros tells him that this is all the information about him, and then the guy notices that he seems to be in some kind of game. Then he notices the shadow sword and the healing, and then the spirit responds that these are his skills and that's why the wound on his face healed so quickly. Then our hero assumes that even if a limb is amputated, it will recover? Moros replies that it all depends on the range of his mana, but there is nothing written in the mana line and the guy notices it. Then the spirit responds, which means that it has yet to reveal this power in itself. Then our hero notices that he has only 300 mana points, and remembers that when he was a psyker, she had more than 1500 mana points. He remembered how the spirit had told him that he had catastrophic strength, but somehow the guy didn't really think, but the spirit thought he had huge potential. People have a proverb, you can't easily pull a fish out of a pond, so if he doesn't try, he'll never try a fish. Next, Cashin asks, can he use this scanner on other people too? Moros confirms this by saying that it is possible only 3 times a day, then he wonders if we should try to use more? The spirit answers how he and Jeff tried and he had to sleep off almost the whole day. Then our hero looks at him and thinks for a whole day plotting something. Next, Moros offers to try out the skills of our hero and he asks what he needs to do now. Should he shout out the name or what? Then the spirit explains that he just imagines the shadow sword in his head, and the guy tries to do exactly as he was told. As a result, he gets to use the skill, which surprises him, since something has just appeared from the shadows. Then he finds out that he can even touch it. Even though it's a shadow, he's really very sharp. But Moros was silent all this time and then thought about how he thought it would take a whole day to train. But he did it right away, and did Jeff really know about his capabilities? The guy looked at the sword and said that it was so hard, he could even use it as a shield. But the spirit tells how the villains themselves know how to create protection and weapons for themselves, but the guy knew it himself. Since they are not in a hurry, he is slowly creating a costume for himself from his abilities. Moros decides to reproach him for the style, which was completely absent, and then our hero asks him to shut up. Later, when evening began to fall, the guy was heading somewhere and Moros asked about it, after which he receives a simple answer: our hero was heading home. Moros did not respond to this, and then the guy explains that Kwan Kanu has a family, and even though his parents are not with them, he lives with his sister. Then Moros wonders if Cashin is going to meet her? To which he responds positively, since he may have such a fate in store for him. But it seems to Cashin that he would definitely like to protect his sister. Moros notices, it seems, our hero's conscience tortured him, and then he answers, because the boy actually died because of him. Suddenly, an explosion occurs nearby, which Cashin pays all his attention to and sees a bunch of people running from there. He sees a building that was completely covered in fire. People around were panicking, someone was shouting that it was a bomb and the internet was not working. Then someone said that the villain grabbed the mother and daughter. Then our hero realizes that there are hostages. He immediately goes there without hesitation, to which Moros draws attention and tells him to wait, because this is a villain and he is much stronger than that schoolboy from the roof. He has incredible strength, but the guy replies that they will fight like villains. But Moros explains to him that the battle between villains is an unspoken taboo. He, as a psyker, should know this. Moros does not know what motivates him, a thirst for revenge or a sense of justice. But now he is also a villain. So he suggests not to get into other people's fights. He doesn't want to make them all his enemies, and give up revenge on Lampas. The guy stops abruptly and looks at the building, after which he says, well, so what? Which greatly surprises Moros. Then the spirit tells Cashin that he is no longer a psyker, but our hero thinks otherwise. After all, he has a hostage, a mother with a child, and knowing that someone is in trouble and turning a blind eye to it, people don't do that. After hearing this, Moros recalls a conversation with Jeff, who spoke for Cashin. What a difficult character he has, of course, but he has the biggest heart among everyone he knows. That's why he trusts Cashin, and then Moros remembered how he chose Jeff himself, who chose Cashin and he couldn't do anything about it. Then the spirit offers to transform and will help him, so they decided to rescue the hostages and catch the villain. They show us the shopping center inside the building where everything was destroyed. Everything was smashed and destroyed. In the middle of this, a mother and daughter were sitting near the window to the street. The woman asked not to do this. In parallel, the villain set bombs on the hostages. He calmed them down and asked them to be quiet and not cry, because they are doing such a fun thing, so why should they cry? He also asked them to smile, telling them, just like him, it was a C-rank villain named Blaster. His class was a bomber. His skill was fire. Meanwhile, the psyker car was standing at the gas station and refueling the car. Kim Woo-chang was waiting for the car to refuel and abruptly decided to look at his right hand, and then he remembers our hero and is sure he is not so simple. And then he realizes that he doesn't even know his name, after which his phone immediately starts ringing and the guy answers the call. At this moment, Lee Dung is talking on the phone with a girl and apologizes for not being around because he is on a mission, so he promises to treat her next time. Then he says goodbye to the girl and approaches the intern, who tells him that while Lee was going to the toilet, the blaster appeared and reminds the senior psyker that this is, in fact, a task that greatly puzzled the senior, namely, The task was to catch the blaster. Then they return us to the villain and show fireworks in the night sky. Then the blaster asks the boy, has he ever seen 5-colored fireworks over the pitch-black evening sky? The boy could hardly hold back tears and trembled very much at the same time, answering the villain that he had never seen these fireworks, and then Blaster tells him that he had never seen such a thing either, and how sad he was because of this. Then he touches his face and tells the boy not to be sad, because his mother's insides and blood will fly everywhere like the most beautiful fireworks. Blaster can't stop being happy just thinking about it, and gets a lot of ecstasy from these thoughts, after which he asks if he can start with her hands and then move on to her feet. He wants to leave his head as a souvenir, so finally his chest and neck. Suddenly there is some kind of explosion, and then the blaster starts smiling, saying that they have a guest and welcomes him. Then he says that the guy should not be shy and go out to play. After that, they respond positively, and abruptly the glass breaks behind him, from where our hero jumps out, about to attack the villain. As a result, he does not have time to react to the blow, and the guy hits him right in the face. From the blow, the blaster flies to the other end of the room directly into the wall with incredible force, after which it simply falls unconscious. We are shown Cashin, who was calm, and it felt like his eyes were glowing with different colors. Then he asks Moros for the hostages, to which he answers, they both have not been injured yet. Suddenly, Moros screams at our hero for his body, and then Cashin notices a bomb on his body, after which it begins to glow. The guy realizes that he is very close to the hostages and the explosion will hit them and the bombs on their bodies, which will lead to a big explosion, and then he decides to jump away from them as far as possible with all his might. As a result, he does so. Then we are shown a view from the outside where a big explosion is taking place. People on the street are panicking that something has exploded. They do not understand where the police are and where are the psychers at all. They show us a room from which very little remains, and in the middle of it stands a blaster, and says he came to them without knocking and does not know why he is here, but he can definitely say that he is a tactless fool. He would like to make a beautiful firework out of it, and it's a pity that it exploded so quickly, and this sadness can only be embodied by the hostages who eventually survived. Blaster, laughing at all this, collects a new bomb in his hand, but suddenly someone attacks the villain on the arm, as a result of which he cuts it off and the blaster dropped the bomb and the villain's hand fell with it. After that, he began to scream hysterically in pain, and at that moment he was approaching him with incredible speed and grabbing him by the shirt. Then he throws him to the ground with all his might, and as soon as all the dust from the blow has gone, they show us a hard-lying blaster that was gathering strength in his hand, but it was shaking and it didn't work out. But our hero grabs his hand and says, "That's the trick again. Even in games enemies don't fall for the same trick twice," and then Cashin gathers strength in his fist to strike. As a result, he hits the villain in the face with all his might, and then blows were heard. These were the blows of our hero, who broke down and did not control himself. He beat and beat the blaster more and more, repeating to himself, "More." His face looked like a monster, and there was not the slightest hint of a person. Unexpectedly, they tried to call him, but he did not hear and enjoyed the beating. But still Moros managed to get through to Cashin, and he stopped. It was as if he woke up from a dream and saw a barely alive villain in front of him, and then Moros tells him that he finally heard him. Our hero begins to come to his senses and cannot believe that he was the one who treated him like that, and looks at his hands, which were shaking and were all covered in blood. Moros tells him that the situation is SOSO, emotions have taken over him, and he has lost his identity. He further explains that if Cashin cannot control himself, he will become a real villain who is controlled by his desires. Then the guy asks him to stop talking, and it made him very sad, because he did not believe that he had become like this. Next, the spirit asks if our hero is okay after the explosion. The guy gets up and trots in parallel, answering that everything is fine, the main thing is to save the hostages. Then he gathered his thoughts and decided to free the hostages, but when he approached them, he and Moros saw how a mother and son were horrified by the sight of our hero. They were afraid of him more than a blaster. Some time later, the police and psychers arrived at the scene of the incident. An ambulance took away Blaster, who was unconscious and in terrible condition. Meanwhile, Psycherly was giving a report on the phone. He confirmed that the hostages have been released and are safe and they need to continue their investigations. But at first glance it seems that this is a fight between two villains. While Kim Woo-chang was examining the torn toy, Lee continued to talk about how witnesses described him, but they have not yet been able to identify his identity. Kim looked at the toy carefully and thought that there was a child among the hostages and could not figure out if there were really two villains. After he heard the police talking, one tells the second if he heard the talk that the hostages were saved by the villain, but the second considers it nonsense, and yes, he also heard something of this kind. But the first to insist that there were witnesses to this, suddenly Kim gets into their conversation, who asked for forgiveness for interfering, but he wonders who they were talking about now. At this moment, Uchkin calls Sikerdun and tells him to go check the cameras in the security room on the first floor, and he will join him soon. The young Siker accepted the order and looked at the toy once more, threw it, and went to the security room. Meanwhile, on the street in the park late at night, our hero is strong on a bench and remembers how a mother and child asked to save them from him and asked him not to kill them. They were terrified and could not stop trembling with fear. Our hero covered his face with his hands and tried to drive away all these thoughts, and then Moros asks why he is so limp. Cashin's answer is, if it wasn't for the spirit, he would have gone crazy too, like that criminal, and this one confirms Moros. He leaned on the back of the bench and looked at the sky, saying that he was really a villain. Suddenly, a message arrives on his phone. He takes it and looks at it. Then the spirit is interested in what is there, to which the guy replies that this is Kanu's sister, and she invites us to dinner together. Moros asks him if he will go home, and he remains silent without answering. As a result, for a couple of seconds after that, his stomach rumbled. Meanwhile, the Sikers were in the security room where Lee Dun couldn't believe his eyes. He wondered who he was. He asked about the villain, namely about our hero, and could not believe in any way what he saw on the screen, and asked if his eyesight was bad or if the villain was really saving hostages. Then he looks at Kim and asks, "Is this some kind of joke?" The young guy looked at it calmly and also did not understand anything, but also thought about something. A little later, we are transferred to the apartment where Kwon Kanu and his sister live. Cashin came home and went into the kitchen. There was food and a note on the table. Our hero takes it and reads it. It was written there, "Warm up the soup with rice and eat. There are also fruits in the refrigerator. You can also take them, and his sister did a good job today. With love from her." Suddenly, he remembers the shelter he was in a previous life where they told him how late he was, and he asked for forgiveness because he was playing and forgot about the time. The woman replied, "For a child who is always late, she has no dinner." But suddenly someone gives bread to young Cashin, and it was Jeff, who asked not to tell that woman and eat quietly. Then he was eating bread from Jeff with a happy face, and this note made our hero remember that moment. He warmed up everything for himself, and then sat down on the table for food and started with soup. And then he thought that it was really delicious, and when was the last time he ate homemade food? It all makes him remember fond memories, and then he just thanks for it all. The next morning, our hero wakes up in his room from the alarm clock on which it was 10 minutes to 8 in the morning. Cashin gradually opens his eyes and something bothers him. Then he went to the bathroom to clean himself up, where brushing his teeth he thought it wasn't him. He just has to live someone else's life. He thought he would feel better after a good sleep, but no. And if he had the opportunity, he would like to go back to the past. After that, the spirit appears and wishes good morning, but our hero answers him that it is not kind. Then he is already putting on his shoes and is about to go to school, and then someone asks him if he is going to school. It was his sister who said, even if he said goodbye to him, and her name was Kwan Yuri, she was a beautiful girl who had just woken up. Cashin, on the other hand, felt strange to finally meet her, and wondered if he could tell her the truth. Suddenly she remembers something and takes a bank card out of her pajama pocket, and gives it to our hero. He tells him to put his pocket money in there and use it wisely, but the guy didn't understand why she was giving him the card. When he picked it up, he remembered how Kwon Kanu had asked her if she could give him money for the next month. But his sister did not understand this request, since he had only given him pocket money last week. The guy didn't know what to answer her, because he couldn't tell how he was attracted to the bullies at school who asked him to borrow money, only $100, and then he just told her that he had lost his wallet. She understood everything then and agreed to give him money and asked him not to worry, then he thanks her for it. But she did not finish, she would put them on a bank card. The boy did not understand that then. After that, Cashin realizes what is happening here by looking at the map, then he says goodbye to her, and is about to leave thanking her for the map and asks her to be careful. Just as she is about to wish him a good day, she suddenly notices and asks him to wait. She notices how he has changed and then it comes to her. His hair looks different, and then she says with a joyful voice, the hairstyle turns out to change people so much. And she's been telling him to cut his hair for a long time, but he replies that he just put it in a different way. Then he leaves and his sister screams after him, asking if he has a girlfriend? He doesn't respond to this, and just says he's going to school. After a while, they show us one of the schools in Korea where Cashin studied. It was noisy and there were a lot of students. Further in the class, 3 shooting galleries looked at everyone somewhere, and could not understand anything. They were looking at one of the hooligans who was looking at something on his phone, and he was strained by these looks. Suddenly, with furious eyes, he looks at his classmates, who abruptly turned away from him, and then he couldn't stand it, and yelled at the whole class, which they all stared at him, and ordered them to quickly turn away. The blonde guy was angry and realized that all this was because of our hero. Suddenly someone took him by the shoulder, and he angrily asked what he needed. But someone turned out to be Cashin, and the bully was seriously scared. The guy asked him if he knew where his desk was. Asking this, he looked at him with a terrible look, which made the bully afraid. Then he just lowers his head to the bottom and obediently points to the place of our hero. When the guy left, the bully was trembling very much with fear. Our hero sat down at his place and Moro says, looking at the bully, "Why is he staring at us like that, directly burning with his gaze?" The bully was scared and furious at the same time that he had lost to the guy earlier. Suddenly the spirit and Cashin heard a conversation about villains near the school. The student said that while he was working part-time, he watched a live broadcast. There was a huge fight between 2 villains. Other students were shocked by this. Moros understands and says that they are talking about our hero, but he pays zero attention to it. Then they discuss that the world is so weird, since recently there was a case about a serial killer, with an injured schoolgirl. Many saw this news, as the villain cut off her limbs and drank all the blood. Some are sure that a psychopath did it for sure. Some said that the driver was a murderer, and many were surprised at this, because he is the head of the Vilzone in the Kadam district. Then Cassiano wondered if there was a Vilzone in that district. The fact is that Vilzona is an autonomous district of villains. Then someone told another rumor about the driver and how he conducts experiments on humans, and schoolchildren are completely disgusted by this. For all of them, this is a great horror, and they hope all the villains will die a painful death. Meanwhile, we are taken to the street where some bully was laughing very hard with a cigarette in his hands. Next to him stood the leader of that gang of school bullies, whom Cashin had laid earlier on the roof. He tells Kwok Taegu to control himself, but the latter calms him down and asks him to give him a little laugh. But this infuriates the student and asks him to close his mouth. The same agrees so that the guy does not freak out. Then he puts out his cigarette and asks what should he do with that guy. The head gives him an envelope with money and tells him not to worry, and they did not deprive him, while the bespectacled man stood behind him and looked attentively. Kwok was delighted to see the envelope, and while they were rejoicing, bespectacled man thought it seemed that Kwok Taegu was close to Kihan, but he would not want to be near this type. Then Kwok puts his hand on the head of the gang and says how good it is to have friends, and you can always rely on someone, after which he asks what should he break to that guy or even kill him. A little later at school, our hero was heading somewhere along the corridor, and suddenly someone called him and asked him to wait. It was Kim Yukin, who said that he did not know Cashin's name, but decided to find out how his wound was, and then our hero shows him the patch and answers, as you can see. Moros watched this and remembered how Cashin had put on a band-aid in the toilet before. The spirit asked him, he has self-healing, so why does he need this band-aid? The guy replied, they would meet that kid Kim anyway. Suddenly suspects something, and then the spirit realizes that the guy is not as stupid as he seems. Cashin asks Kim why he called him to pay for the band-aid. Kim notices how they are being watched and responds to our hero, maybe to repay with something else instead of money. Cashin smiled and turned to leave, saying at the same time that he didn't think about it. Kim decides to ask him before he leaves, what is his name? Then Cashin answers him with his current name, Quan Kong, and leaves, while Kim thinks about pronouncing his name. Leaving school, the guy thinks how uncomfortable it was for him about the intern, and then Moros asks if he is thinking about Kim, and since he does not answer, then he is still right. Next, our hero thinks his name is Kim Yukin, owns fire, quite attractive, tall, the dream of all schoolgirls. Excellent academic performance, exemplary behavior, a promising psyker who cannot close his eyes to justice. That's what Cashin can say about him from all the information he has dug up. But then Morse realizes that the guy is really good and decides to ask, is he jealous? Cashin answers, his dream is to become like Cashin Lee, a top psyker with the same power, and the spirit asks, is he Kim's idol? Our hero replies, since he is so good, he should have been sent to a special school for training psychers and does not understand what he is doing in an ordinary school. Moros listen to him in silence, and abruptly notices that they are being watched at the very end of the street behind the fence, and then wonders why those two are looking at them like that. These were the same bullies from school who had been following him and reporting to the ringleader over the phone. They were asked what was going on there, and then the blonde-haired bully said everything was going well and they continued surveillance, and said they would call back later. Meanwhile, the leader stood with Kwok Taegu and his friend and told them how everything was going according to plan. At least this fool was good for something. Kwok throws away a cigarette and says that it's time for them to move forward to punish our hero. After a while, the hooligans continued to follow him and reached the alley that leads to the villas. Suddenly someone turned to them. This almost made the guy shit his pants, and then the croaker jokes with him that he knows such terrible words, but he replies out of fright that he did not mean it. Their boss asks where their target is and then he points to the alley. But he wasn't there, which is what the elders are talking about. But he must be there, he was there just a second ago, and then the bespectacled man assumes how he turned into that alley. The hooligans do not hesitate to decide to run in that direction, but I tried to stop them, because Wilson is there, and this puzzled him very much. They came running to the area where the villains live and they are walking down the street, but they can't find our hero in any way. Kwok asks, since there is no further road, but they have not found this guy, so where is he? And then the bespectacled man was asked if they had turned there at all, to which he replied positively. But the Kwok comes up to him and hits him on the leg in parallel, asking if they decided to play games with him. The bespectacled man falls to his knees from the blow, and the croaker tells him they just had to follow him and asks why he is silent. The bespectacled man was trembling in pain and could not answer anything. But suddenly they all noticed Cashin, who was standing behind them, and said, it seems that he found them. At that moment, they were being watched by a camera that was aimed at Cashin, and already on the other side it was clear that someone was looking at our hero. It was a room full of computers that had a lot of information and video from cameras in different areas. The man sitting on the chair in front of the monitors was twirling a screwdriver in his hand, and it was the boss of the Vilzone himself, named Driver, who drew attention to that group and said that they had guests. Meanwhile, our hero was watching the hooligans, and then Kwok turns to his friends saying that they just look at this guy. He wasn't even surprised that they were here. Did he really lose his fear? And is he the one who got on Ki-hun? But our hero does not answer them and just keeps silent and looks at the Kwok. Then he laughs and gives Cashin 3 seconds, saying that he can run while there is a chance. Then he makes a report in 3 seconds. But Cashin did not move from his place and continued to look at them. This also surprised the hooligans of the schoolchildren, and the Kwok himself was angry. He approaches him and says that the guy is really asking for a fight, at which point Cashin asks, he doesn't know how to fight, right? Kwak did not understand the question, and immediately at this moment 2 fingers of Cashin fly into his eyes and he hits him in the eyes, from which he begins to scream in pain. Then the guy grabs him by the hair and hits him right into the wall. As a result, Kwak falls unconscious. This shocked the bullies from school, looking at the Kwok, who lay and did not move, and our hero asked the bully, calling him a talker, Why is he being framed? Quack's friend got angry and ran to attack Cashin, shouting, but he can't grab the guy in any way, as he dodges all his attacks. As a result of the last attack, Cashin finds himself behind the bully and hits him on the leg. He fell down with his eyes closed, and when he opened them, he sees a leg in front of his face. Cashin says how he gave them a chance to come to their senses, but they're jerks, they're asking for it. After that, he hit him in the face and he hysterically began to scream in pain. Then he looks at the 3 school bullies and asks if they will already run away. Meanwhile, the Quack got up and spoke like a goat, our hero, and hardly gets up, saying that he is a corpse. This surprised everyone and our hero thought maybe he overdid it. Then Quack stands up and it turns out that he is the 2nd place in the national Thai boxing competitions. The leader of the school hooligans was happy about this, since Quack is now serious because he got angry, and then Cassin is definitely finished. Everyone was surprised by the croak, but our hero stood and looked at him. Then we are transferred to the gym in our hero's previous life, where everyone trained and went about their business, while someone fought in the ring. It was a C-rank psyker named John Klaus. His class was a stiker, and the skill was strength, and he was hitting someone. They shouted at him to keep John quiet and not kill the newcomer, laughing at the same time. Someone comes up to them and asks what they are doing. It was Jack, who had just come to the gym, and he was late for something. He reminds them how he asked them what they were doing, and then they answer him. They don't see what, they watch sparring and laugh. Jack noticed something while John was hitting the rookie with all his might. He was also standing in the block. John asks why without protection and is told that the newcomer told him he didn't need it and laughed. But Jack wasn't referring to the newcomer, but to John, and that surprised everyone, because no one understood what he meant. Then Jack replies that this newcomer Cashin Lee is a graduate of the ABPP, or the Psyker Combat Training Agency, the youngest in the entire history of the agency. And then people remember that this is the youngest graduate, and Jack adds, he is a master of hand-to-hand combat, and has never lost a one-on-one battle. This shocked people who did not believe in it, because they thought that his power was just on fire, and wasn't he from the enlightened class. At that moment, they all turned their attention to the ring where our hero Cashin started hitting John and he fell. At this moment, we were abruptly transferred to the present, where the Quack also falls unconscious and our hero stood in front of him. Everyone was surprised and scared by what they saw, but the Quack came to himself and expectorates blood. Abruptly, Cashin grabs his face and begins to press, and he felt a terrifying energy, and meanwhile our hero thought, what stupid schoolchildren. They only know how to attack schoolchildren, since they themselves do not yet know how terrible the world can be. And if they had come across such a strong opponent like him earlier, they would hardly have formed this squad of morons. And then he remembers all those who killed him, and if he had been much stronger than he, Jeff, and Kanu, they would have been able to avoid such a fate, which eventually happened to them, so he needs to become so powerful to destroy the Lampas. The bully students were shocked and scared that they even trembled, and then one of them said that they needed to get out, and then they started screaming when they saw the villain Driver above them, who was watching them. He was a B-rank villain named Driver. His engineer class and skill were light. He stood on a large screwdriver and watched the fight of this gang. He stood calmly on it, and looked at them until they were very scared when they realized that they were facing a villain, and then they all ran away in horror as fast as possible, and the croaker also ran after them. Cashin coolly looked at the villain. The Driver, in turn, looked at the kid with a smile. Suddenly, Moros turns to the black-haired man, but Cashin did not hear the spirit. Cashin recalled rumors about the Driver and was surprised that the famous villain was in front of him. At this moment, the Driver descends from his glider to the ground and declares that the kid is very interesting. After all, he expected that the boy would be beaten by the crowd and he was in a hurry to help. But everything turned out differently. The cold-blooded Cashin stated that he did not ask for anyone's help, and in response to this, the villain grinned, after which he asked the boy why he was so serious and did he really not know who was in front of him? However, the schoolboy undoubtedly called his villainous name. Pulling out his weapon, the bespectacled man stated that the fact that the boy did not react in any way by saying his name angered him. Light gradually began to shine from the cannon, but despite this, the black-haired guy continued to stand still. At the same time, the driver spoke up again and stated that the youngster should have been ready for this anyway when he entered the villager populated by villains. The light coming from the cannon became even more intense, and at the next moment, a pretty bouquet appeared in front of Cashin and the ancient spirit. The driver began to laugh and asked the black-haired man if he had shat himself. However, Cashin continued to stand impassively, even though he was a little scared by the circus from the main villain. Suddenly, the driver changed his tone and said that the next time there would be no jokes and he would kick the guy's ass. However, the black-haired man did not know what to answer, so he just pinned the clown and walked away. The driver asked where the kid went, but he just said that he was going home. The confused owner of the villa did not even know what he should do next. Soon the guy went into the alley and there Frost told the guy that he had just almost got into a big mess, because the driver was too strong a rival for him. And also the spirit told that he had much more mana. At that moment the student turned away from his invisible companion and walked away. Frost did not understand what was happening and followed the black-haired one. At the same time, he saw how a sad boy ran into a wall. The ancient spirit exhaled and asked the guy not to get upset. After all, when they start training, he will definitely become stronger, and maybe at this moment Cashin interrupts the spirit's monologue and asks him to tell absolutely everything he knows about the driver. This struck Frost, but the newly minted villain himself said that this was a great chance to fight a strong opponent, and it would also be the best training for him, because it would be a real risk to his life. And the gambling Cashin was not going to waste such a great opportunity. Then we are transported back to the driver, who was waving his legs trying to repeat Cashin's attacks earlier. He didn't understand how the guy did it, and then he thought that this brat and his movement were so strange, then he wondered who he was at all. He wasn't even scared at the sight of the driver. The high school students are so scary now, the villain says, and is about to leave. As soon as he started walking, our hero suddenly attacks him from behind and the driver manages to react to this, although he did not understand anything. He manages to block the guy's blow, but he was thrown back a couple of meters, and as soon as he decided to look at the enemy's next actions, he sees Cashin heading for a new attack at full speed without letting him catch his breath. Cashin uses a shadow sword, but the driver jumps over him and dodges the attack. Our hero realizes that the driver is not as simple as it seems. The villain begins to summon his weapon and summons his blaster, and then Moros warns Cashin that he is going to shoot them. The driver says that he is in great danger now. Does he understand this or not? He starts loading his weapon for a shot and says, "What you get, you always need to give back," and then our hero was a little surprised. After that, there was a shot of the driver's skill, Driver Ray, and it flew straight at our hero and there was a big explosion. This explosion was seen by the other three villains and did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the driver looked at the result of the shot and saw how our hero covered himself with a shadow sword. The shot did not cause any damage to him, and then the guy remembers how Moros told him that the amount of mana of the driver exceeds 1,000. That is, he is 3 times stronger than Cashin, and his name was written on his card. The possibilities were mechanical weapons, the features were the leader, the trigger was being investigated, the skills were mechanical hand, driver punch, driver points, driver shaping, mana weapon formation, and his mana range was 1,100. Reading all this, our hero thought about it, but Moros did not understand whether they listened to him at all. Then the guy says that the battle with him will be even more interesting than he expected. Then we are returned to the battle where our hero defended himself with a sword and the spirit asked him, is he so confident in himself? The driver says that it was a great block and then starting a new attack asks if he didn't put enough force. Then he collects energy in his weapon and falls on our hero, saying that now he will definitely try. The guy reacts to this and dodges, but the driver immediately attacked again, but our hero is able to dodge every blow, which he does. The driver begins to tense up, because he did not expect, he does not understand how he manages to predict his movement, and who is he anyway? Continuing to attack him, he thinks that he can't help but know a kid with such skills. Is this really the guy who killed Blaster? At this moment, the driver strikes again and our hero manages to stop him with his hand, after which the driver's mechanical weapon began to heal and then began to break. Then he notices how the driver uses his other skill and his eyes start to glow, after which a ray shoots out of them. But it also does not hit, and the guy leans over him and immediately strikes the driver's leg, causing him to lose his balance. The villain starts to fall and thinks at this moment, "Just look, he's crazy." Then in the nude asks him a question, "Is he really a master?" At this moment, Cashin abruptly jumps on the driver to attack. The same manages to land and immediately jump back to his feet, and immediately after that uses his other skill, mechanical hand. A huge mechanical hand is directed directly at our hero. The same gathers strength in his hand and lets a large number of shadow daggers directly into his hand, causing it to break. This surprised the driver very much, and for a moment he lost concentration. At that moment Kashiana caught him and struck him a blow from which the villain flew back several meters, but still managed to stop falling on his feet. He was very puzzled and thought that this was no joke. This guy's skills were really on another level. These movements could not be worked out without professional training and training. Terrifying energy was coming from our hero. Suddenly someone else appears saying, "That's where you are, the driver," and they ask, "What's going on here?" The spirit and Cashin did not expect this, as did the driver himself, but other villains appear. The first was an A-rank villain named Crow. Her cashier was a summoner, the skill was darkness. The second was a B-rank villain named Red Eye. His BVL class was an archer, the skill was light. And the last BVL behind Cashin, who asked if the driver thought it was too long? And he goes on to say that it's time to stop playing with a beginner. It was a B-rank villain named Black Hand. His class was Theriker, and his skill was minerals. They all surrounded our hero and he starts to smile, then decides to ask if he really called his friends, because he loses in a one-on-one battle with him? The crow asks again in surprise about the loss, and then the driver answers, "Not exactly, he is in the process." Then the crow mocks him and says that apparently he is getting resolutely from the kid, but he replies, as he said, that he is only in the process of losing. This surprised everyone, and especially the Black Hand, who could not believe that their driver was losing to a schoolboy. Next, the driver decides to ask why he attacked him at all, and the others waited attentively for an answer, after which the guy replied that he wanted to test his strength with a strong opponent, and he couldn't just leave alone a creature that kills innocent people for fun. These words surprised Moros very much, but Sam Driver did not understand him a little and assumed that he was most likely talking about the serial killer, which is now rumored. The crow adds oil to the fire by saying, "Since the driver is a murderer," then the stick rubs his head and laughs. Red Eye just kept silent. The driver asks if the guy really thinks it's him, and the crow laughs further and is responsible for the guy, which of course. The driver says that it's even insulting, and does anyone really believe in these stupid gossips? Meanwhile, the Black Hand looked at our hero and thought who this kid was and behaved too confidently in front of the driver himself, after which he decided to tame this confidence of his. The driver says if in general, he will say briefly, he is not the killer he is looking for, but Cashin asks for evidence proving this. But the villain replies that there are none. As soon as he asked again that there was no evidence, his head suddenly ached and he grabbed it, not understanding what was happening. At this moment, the Black Hand decides to attack Cashin from behind, thinking that he is finished now, he will teach him respect. He swings his fist and uses the Death Glove skill to wish death to our hero. He also notices the attack a moment before the blow. After the blow, the Black Hand realizes that he did not hit and Cashin was on the side of the villain and asked him, "And which of them is the scoundrel now?" The Black Hand did not understand how such a thing was possible at all, and then our hero, gathering strength in his hands, says that people say only the last scum attack from behind. The Black Hand manages to deliver another blow, but again it missed and the guy was already under him. He gathered power in his hands and says again that he will have to take up his re-education, and in parallel this hits him with all his might. This amazed everyone, and the Black Hand flew off a few meters and immediately passed out. Then the Red Eye ran to check it while the driver was saying that he shouldn't have run into it. After checking the villain, Red Eye couldn't believe it, since Black Hand is the third most powerful villain in the Vilzen, and the guy knocked him out with one blow. Cashin clutched his head again, and the spirit was interested in his condition, as the pain continued, and suddenly the driver took his word, who asked, apart from the wild pain in his head? He turns on the scanner from his glasses and responds, his mana count does not exceed 300, but in such a short time he was able to use it to the fullest. The crow asked again for 300 mana points, and she was interested. But Retta was shocked by this, since it turns out that he is a D-class villain. Then the villain thought about it, and wondered how the D-class could be capable of such a thing. He was able to knock out a black hand with a class B with one blow. Then the driver says that no one was surprised, there are diamonds everywhere, and the amount of mana does not determine who you will come out of the battle, the winner or the loser. At this moment, he looks at his mechanical weapon and remembers, thinking in parallel, the incredible strength and reaction speed, a strange but very effective combat technique, which makes it clear that he is really on another level, not a man, but an ideal killing machine. Next, he opens something in the body of his mechanical weapon, and there was a strange yellow crystal lying there, which he takes out and shows our hero, asking if he knows what it is. Then the guy thought that it was most likely a mana crystal, but did not say it out loud. The driver begins to explain that villains can increase their points not only through highly intensive training, but also by taking mana crystals. After that, he throws this crystal into the hands of our hero and he catches it without understanding why. The driver just tells him in one word to eat this crystal and then increase mana points. Cashin wonders why he is giving it to him, and then the villain replies that he wants to make a deal. But the guy immediately replies that he does not need it. Then the driver explains, he doesn't like injustice, and it's about the serial killer he thought he was, so he wants Cashin to catch him instead. And if he accepts his gift, he will automatically accept it as consent. It is up to our hero to decide, but in his place the driver would not refuse. Then Cashin assumes and asks, is he so covertly trying to tell him that he is not the killer he is looking for? The driver confirms this, since this is the truth, and he does not want unnecessary suspicions. Cashin wonders, if that's the case, why doesn't he catch the serial killer himself? In response, the driver laughed and replied, there is a reason for everything. Then they looked at each other, and eventually broke up. After a while, Cashin was walking home down the street and holding a crystal in his hand, asking Moros, should he just eat it? The spirit tells us that there are two types of mana crystals, namely natural and artificial, and the difference between them is even greater than the difference between heaven and earth. It's a pity that this is an artificial stone, but even it will help Cashin add mana. But Preen replies that he already knows all this. Then the spirit adds, you need to remember the rule, you should take crystals only in the state of the villain. And then the guy looks at the crystal and then shows the crystal in his hand, which has changed dramatically. Already standing on the roof, Cashin in the form of a villain is going to eat a crystal and asks if this is exactly a mana crystal? Moros confirms this, and the guy thinks about it a little more and then says, but Jeff told him not to take food from strangers, and eats the crystal. But nothing happens and the guy does not understand this. Then he says that nothing has changed, just nothing at all. But Moros asks to wait a little. Abruptly, Cashin begins to feel incredible energy, and he was immediately enveloped by his own villain power, which wanted to escape. The guy did not understand what was happening, and then Moros tells him to control himself and calm down, after which the spirit sees how the power of our hero begins to break out, and eventually hits a ray of light directly into the sky, illuminating several areas like the sun during the day. And after that, Cashin realizes how there really is more mana. He examines himself and realizes that he has absorbed only one mana crystal, but he feels such great power. Now he understands why all the villains are chasing mana so much, but still, is it fair? Next, he asks Moros to check his profile again, and a couple of minutes later, Moros shouted out what happened and why the amount of mana became 350. The guy is sparring, that is, there are 50 more units of it. Moros is in great shock from this and thinks, even if he ate a real mana crystal, at best he could get from 5 to 10 mana units, but 50, yes, that's 10 times the profit. Then he realizes that this is an incredible efficiency. His destructive power is too dangerous. Meanwhile, our hero notices something on his status panel and asks Moros what it is. He has a hidden skill. Mining mana crystals. And he asks what he should do with it. Moros tells him, as it is written there, it means that he will be able to cast mana crystals from magic weapons and even from the legendary one, which consists of mana crystals. But our hero is upset, because he thought that indoor skills are much cooler, and this is a meaningless skill, and then Moros is offended, since this is not the case. The spirit says mining mana crystals from magic weapons, but only he is capable of this. It means that he will be able to extract all the mana crystals he wants. Then Cashin asks, if this is the case, then where can I find a magic weapon? Meanwhile, at the Donuts Cafe, Li Deng shows a bright and new sword and says finally it's in his hands and calls it a charm, and the name of the sword is Brilliant Migres. After that, he asks Kim to say at least something, and he briefly and simply says that the sword is good, but Li asks him to be at least a little happy and could at least praise in a human way. He goes on to say that this is one of the 2 best magic swords. But Kim Woo-chang is not interested in this, and just asks if Deng got information about the villain who fought with the blaster? But Li is not happy about this, and he says how the guy famously changes the subject. There is nothing on him in their system, and he probably only recently turned. Then Kim suggests that he may be an outsider, or an unregistered psyker, but Li considers this impossible. Even from his appearance one can definitely say that he is a villain. Next, Li says that our hero is not the main problem. Meanwhile, other people are looking at them, who consider the young psyker an actor, and his Prachetskia is so cool. Dun says Kim has heard about the serial killer. Because of him they will not get out of the state of emergency with the special squad in any way. But the guy thought it was the work of the driver that he was asking about, and he heard that he was the main suspect. But Li knows that he had nothing to do with it, and Kim did not understand this and asks how he can be sure of this. And then the psyker answers, the driver, of course, is capable of a lot for the sake of a new class of car or some cool electronic thing, but definitely not a killer. But Kim tells him not to forget that the driver of villains, he is crazy for everything, and then Li drinks tea and answers, of course, given the nature of the crime, we can say that this is the work of a villain. But are they the only ones crazy? Any ordinary person can go off the rails without anyone's help, explains Dun, and then Kim remembers the moment with our hero, who saved people earlier. Dun also remembers about the intern's sister, who is engaged in modeling, and she has already moved to high school, which she asks Kim about, but he replies that she has a curfew. Li considers this prudent and adds, generally speaking, let him be careful until they catch the serial killer, and the young psyker thinks about it. We are transferred to the Ace studio where a photo shoot is taking place, and the photographer says how he needs even more arrogance in his gaze. He filmed 2 beautiful girls, and says how well they do. They change their poses and facial expressions, and soon they finish the photo shoot. After her, the girl with pink hair was standing on the street, and was already wondering how it was 7 in the evening, but she wanted to run into the store on her way home. But she no longer has time. It was Kim Nam, a student of the first year of high school and the younger sister of Kim Uchin. She was thinking how she needed to buy something and suddenly turns her attention to the second model, which was a first-year high school student named An Min-young, and something was bothering her. Nain comes up to her and is surprised that she is still here and is not going anywhere. She is also surprised to notice Nain, who did not understand anything, and then looked at her. Minin grabs her hand and invites her to go to the vending machines with toys. Nain asks, does she want to go right now? Minin answers how long it's been since they've been there, and resists a little. Min-young says it's only once and they're quick, but Nian says she can't, because she has a curfew. But looking at this, a friend asks Nain to go with her, and then she agrees and they went to the vending machines with toys. Meanwhile, someone was watching them from around the corner, plotting something terrible. That evening, at home, Cashin watched the news where it was written how psychers promised to catch a serial killer very soon and a special squad moved to help the citizens. The guy notices that there are already 3 deaths and Moros asks if he will agree to the driver's assumption. Cashin doesn't care about the deal, but if there are more victims, since the killer is unlikely to stop. Moros does not answer anything, looking at the news, and then Cashin says it is difficult to catch a criminal who has no purpose, except for information about the murder sites. There is nothing else. Then Moros offers to use the driver's gift, but the guy doesn't know if it's worth it. It even puzzled Moros a little. And then they remember the gift itself and how they received it. We are transported back some time, when Cashin was holding the phone in his hands and asked why else. The driver told him, well, they need to keep in touch somehow. You can only send messages and transfer files on this phone. It doesn't have a location tracker, so it's safe. But our hero does not need this, which he says, but the driver promised to share information about the killer with him, and if he wants to ask something, then let him just write to him. The driver really wants to help him with all his heart, so he asks Cashin to catch the killer for sure. Currently, the guy was looking at the phone and remembered this conversation, after which he decides to write, but abruptly changes his mind and puts the phone on the table and will not do it. Then he leaves the room and says he has self-respect, he is not going to cooperate with the villain, and Moros asks where he is going? Cashin replies that he cannot stay in the apartment, he needs to get some air. Meanwhile, at the slot machines, Minin and Nain were able to catch one of the toys. Minin watched this Nain and said how there was very little left to pull it out, but suddenly the toy pops out and they could not pull it out again. From this, Naeun was depressed and Minin supported her saying that it was close. Then she says she doesn't understand why they didn't catch anything and offers again. But Naeun refuses, since it was time for her to go home long ago. Meanwhile, they are being watched by an unknown drone, while Minyoung was upset by the fact that it was time for her even though it was not yet 8 o'clock. The drone was carefully watching the girls and did not take his attention off them. Meanwhile, Nain explains to her friend that she has a curfew, and then Minin realized this and became very sad, as if something was gnawing at her. She asks the psycher's sister if she can stay with her a little longer? And then Nain notices something strange in her friend's behavior and decides to ask her what is going on. After thinking for a while, Minin decides to tell honestly how she saw something, and then Naeun wonders what exactly she saw. Minin says one girl from their school was killed a couple of days ago and she saw, but Nain did not immediately understand what her friend was talking about. Minin continued, she really wanted to tell someone, but she was so scared. It seems to her that the killer is now coming after her, and thinking about it, the girl starts shaking with fear. Naeun realized this and immediately asked, did the killer really see her? Then she abruptly grabs her friend's hands and says, you can't just leave it, and suggests that you go to the station together as soon as possible. After that, they ran to the exit, and Nain asks them to hurry up and says if she saw the killer, then she herself is in danger. As soon as they run up to the exit, the light turns off abruptly. The girls could not understand why they closed so suddenly, and why did they turn off the light. Next, Nain notices a puddle of blood under him, and at that moment, unexpectedly for the girls, someone says so they met again. The girls noticed something and Naeun stood in front to protect her friend, watching as someone appeared in front of them. As a result, they were both very scared of what was in front of them. A villain from the blood appeared in front of them, who considered Minin an unhappy child. It was a B-rank villain named Bloodrain. His cows was enlightened and had the ability of psychokinesis. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Cashin stands on the roof of one of the buildings and looks down. He stood silently and watched life in the city, and then Moros decides to say that it seems to him that this walk does not really help. The guy answers him, if he is going to be harmful, it would be better to stay at home. The spirit says that he would gladly stay, but he cannot leave our hero. Suddenly, a message came to the phone and the guy takes it out of his pocket and looks at what's there. But Moros notices that this is exactly the phone that the driver gave them. Then he asks the guy, does he keep him with him because of his ego? Cashin answers he also needs to somehow check what the driver is sending there, after which he does it. When he opened the message, he was surprised and immediately his face became more serious. A recording opened there showing Minyoung and Nain, who are currently in danger, and you can also see Bloodrain, who is clearly going to kill the innocent girls. This recording was transmitted via a drone that was at the place where this is happening. Naeun was already more collected than her friend and understood that in front of them was a villain. She also understood, even from his appearance it was easy to say that he was a born killer. Then a completely scared Minin asked what they should do now. At that moment, Nain remembered something, how her older brother gave her a certain device and then her younger sister asked what it was. Uchin explained that this is an emergency call device and suggested that it is not a toy, so he asks you to handle with caution. He said if something happened, just let her push it, and he would immediately come to her aid. After that, we were returned to the present, where Nain do press the device behind her back and thinks, since it's not a toy, she asks this device to work. Bloodrain says how they look so tired and scared, while simultaneously collecting a lot of blood around them, and further asks them not to be afraid, since he can give them a serene eternity. But Nain shouts back at him to shut his mouth and calls him crazy at the same time. This surprised the villain, and he did not even immediately understand such impudence. Nain continues to tell him without a drop of fear, if he's so cool, then let him show what he's capable of and give him the middle finger. The villain replies that now such impudent children have gone and the girls feel a terrible aura. At the same moment the psycher's sister thinks she needs to somehow stall for time until her brother comes. She decides on the question and immediately asks him, why is he killing people? He paused for a moment looking at her and asks in response, is it necessary to look for the reason that you love? When the girl heard this, she realized that he was completely crazy. Then Bloodrain licks the blood from his hands and agrees to answer the question, even though he is very stupid. He tells how he likes the taste of fresh blood and the sound of flesh tearing apart. This is what he lives for. He starts coming up and adds that this is his greatest pleasure. The girl picks up the bag and shouts that he does not come up and she will defend herself. Then he warns that her brother will come soon and says he is very strong, so strong that he will deal with him in 3 seconds. This made the villain smile and he asked if her brother would really come here. She calls him a jerk like Kamar and confirms the imminent arrival of her brother, and nothing will remain of him. Bloodrain finds it interesting and says when he sees his sister's body without a single drop of blood inside, what will be the expression on his face? In parallel to the question, he collected the power of blood in his hand and it scared the girls very much, and then the villain adds how he will do something else and attacks Nain. But it only seemed and the blow went past the girl right into the minin. He injured Minyoung and she immediately fell down already covered in blood. This shocked Nain very much and she started shouting her friend's name in the hope that she would wake up. She asked her to wake up by repeating her name and saying how she couldn't die. Bloodrain, watching this, says that the next one will be Nain, and so she could hardly hold back tears and trembled all over seeing how the villain gathered strength to strike and says that he will make a gift for meeting her brother. At the last moment, the girl closed her eyes, but suddenly someone loudly addressed the villain and the girl abruptly opened her eyes after hearing someone's voice. Suddenly, a wall breaks behind her and our hero Cashin flies in from there. He turned around and did not understand anything, but a sharp hope dawned in her. It also relieved Bloodrain. Then Cashin ran at him, saying that he had brought a gift for him, after which he uses a shadow sword and attacks the villain, telling him to choke on the gift. Bloodrain manages to duck from the blow at the last moment and the sword passes by him. As soon as he raised his face back, he saw how our hero was already there for the second blow, but Bloodrain manages to react and hits the guy with his feet doing a somersault backwards. Cashin flew back a little, but landed on his feet and abruptly felt pain and noticed how his hand was shaking, with which he blocked Bloodrain's blow earlier, and this surprised him. Bloodrain was also surprised to see a villain in front of him, and did not understand who he was and assumed that the girl's brother was a villain. The girl looked at him and thought, who is this? Bloodrain gets up and thinks how he has never seen such techniques anywhere before and suddenly it dawned on him, is this really the guy who defeated the blaster? Now he wants to face off with him? This makes the villain smile, as he finds it interesting and as a result, he suggests to the guy to return to this moment, but not to be very happy, since he will be the cause of our hero's death and in parallel he begins to disappear. Nain, looking at this, was terrified and shaking all over, as she realized that what Bloodrain said was for her. Cashin, thinking that he was telling him about his death at the hands of Bloodrain, shouted at him, how dare he talk his teeth and run away at the same time? Our hero ran at him in order to catch him, but he does not have time and the villain disappears, and in his place there are only traces of blood. Cashin tries to find it, thinking that he has not gone far, but suddenly Nain turns to him and asks him to help her friend Minin. The guy looked at her and saw a sincere request, and worries for her friend. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Kim Woo-chang was saying that his sister had pressed the emergency button, and Lee asked if it could have been an accident. Parpen answers, then she would have called and said she would not have pressed just like that, and Din understands everything and says that he has already alerted the police, so they will be there soon. The guy looks at the phone and asks, "Let her be all right." We were brought back to the place of advent where our hero calls an ambulance saying that there is an urgent patient here and asks them to hurry up. He tells the girl, giving her the phone, he called the ambulance, now they need to stop the bleeding, and asks if she has anything with which to bandage the wound. She immediately says that she will look for it, and the guy adds that she needs something elastic, and then the girl opens the bag and looks for something elastic. As a result, she gives some kind of package to Cashin, and he did not understand what the package was about and asked. The girl replied, "These are tights, they stretch very well." As a result, he bandaged Minan's wound and asked Moros to scan the girl's condition. He also asked if he wanted the spirit to check how bad everything was. But for this he does not need his system, and then he scans it, and answers how he thinks it can survive. The girl also asks if Minan can survive with such wounds. The guy will answer positively. The main thing is that the ambulance arrived faster, and these news pleased Nain, and immediately after that the ambulance arrives, which is what our hero says. Then he gets up and says that now he can leave the girl to them, and he is going to leave. Realizing this, Nain thanks Cashin and asks if he will leave. Cashin replies that of course, since people will immediately run away when they see him. At that moment the girl, looking at him, became interested in our hero, and after that he disappeared. She silently watched as he left. Cashin moved as far away as possible very quickly so as not to fall under suspicion. And then Moro says how lucky they were. If he hadn't come on time, they would both have died. Cashin abruptly notices something, after which he stops on one of the roofs and tells how he is infuriated by this drone that is watching him. Suddenly someone whistles and the feathers of crows appear, as a result of which the crow herself appears to our hero and says, "So they met, and there was a crow in a hat next to her, who said what kind of people, they haven't seen each other for a long time." She asks if the guy doesn't remember them, and because of this she is so sad that she even wants to kill him. Cashin remembers this woman, and we are sharply shown the monitors that transmitted them a picture from the drone that was watching them. And the drone belonged to the driver, and he was watching them, and they hear how the guy responds to the crow. It is unlikely that it is so easy to forget, for which the driver thanks our hero. She did not introduce herself earlier and says her nickname. Her name is Crow. After which she asked if the nickname was suitable for her, wasn't it? Next, she asks for his nickname, and the guy replies that he doesn't have one, to which she laughs and says, so he doesn't have a villainous name yet. The guy asks to get to the point, and asks what kind of drones are these? The crow replies that the driver uses them to catch the serial killer. The guy asks, so they found out the location of the criminal? And the woman responds positively. She says, thanks to them, they found out the identity of their killer, and then the guy wonders who he is? The crow answers, this is Bloodrain, a bloodthirsty criminal who committed terrible murders all over the country. They suspected him from the very beginning, but they did not have the necessary evidence, and the crow on the woman's shoulder adds that he is very bad. And then the woman says that it is generally difficult to go against her own nature, but she abruptly changed her mind and asked him to forget what she had just said. Otherwise she would beat him to death. The guy was in a kind of surprise and misunderstanding. He did not understand what was wrong with her. He continues, he would not like to do something that the driver would not like, and blows a kiss to the camera. But the driver did not look at the screen at all and was looking for his popcorn, which he put somewhere under the table. Then he remembers something else and says how the driver asked to give a certain cow to our hero, all explanations later. So he just asks him to take it away, and throws this box right into his hands, and he immediately catches it, after which he looks at it, and asks what is it. The crow replies that this is the promised reward from the driver. Then he opens the box, and there were 3 crystals lying there, and the guy looked at them and realized that they were of the highest quality. The very next morning, it was reported on the news that last night at 8 o'clock in the evening, the villain suspected of a series of murders committed an attack again. But thanks to the psychers who arrived on the scene in time, victims were avoided. Our hero's older sister was watching this news, and at that moment he was leaving his room. The news continued to say that despite the fact that there is an injured schoolgirl who is currently in the hospital, her condition remains stable, and Yuri breathed a sigh of relief from this. Cashin silently put on his shoes and was about to leave when his sister asked him if he was going to school, and he answered positively. She asked him to be careful, to which he agrees. Going to school, Cashin thinks it has been several weeks since he took over Quan Kang's body, and although the most important thing for him should be revenge on Lampas, he needs to figure out how much he can trust Moros. Even a sudden appearance in the Wilson was not in the plans, and then he remembers a conversation with the crow after he received the crystals. He asked that his reward was 3 magic crystals of the highest quality. He didn't understand it, and took one to make sure and still didn't understand. Then the crow asked if it wasn't enough for him. But the guy says that it's too much, and the woman thought so too, but she didn't decide. She said that it's hard to fight the serial number with his powers now, but there's a little tracker in the box made by the driver, so she asks Cashin to use it if necessary. And as she leaves, she remembers something else about Cleathan and says how they determined his location and sent him a file, and not that they expected anything, but does he know what will happen if he upsets the driver? We were returned to the real ones, and Cashin turned around asking himself the question, what is on the driver's mind? Moros asks our hero, is this the way to school? Cashin answers, he needs to go to some place. He considers him a truant in spirit. Further, the guy explains, after analyzing the materials sent by the driver, he found information about the Sowa school, and 2 schoolgirls whom he saved then, from there. What if they found something on Bloodrain if they looked there? And then Moros asked if he thought he was an investigator. Cashin replies that he needs to try to search, although it will take some time. Also, one of the girls is the younger sister of that popular guy from their school, Kim Yukin, and our hero is looking at Nayoung's profile with her brother's picture. After that, he decides to call the school, and the spirit still doesn't understand anything. Cashin calls and says that it's Quan Kanu, he's sick here a little bit, and will sit at home pretending to cough. Moros didn't know what to answer to this. Meanwhile, Kim Woo-chang was sitting in the corridor of one of the hospitals, who was approached with a cup of coffee. Was it Dun, and he brought the guy coffee asking him if he had slept at all today? But he said that he did not sleep. Then Dun asks about his sister. The guy says that she just fell asleep. Uchin asks if Dun has seen the case file. Of course, he saw and says that the surveillance video is not very clear, but it was definitely a blood drain. Only he can suck the blood out of the victim, leaving the body untouched, but only the serial killer constantly mocks the bodies, so he is hardly the one they are looking for. It is not him, and Dun at this moment grabs his head without understanding anything. And after that, Uchin says how that villain helped again, but this time he asks the girls and Lee about the one who dealt with the blaster. The guy remembers the moment when he looked at the cameras after the incident with the blaster, and says how Nain told him that he came there to save them. No matter how crazy the villains were, but he saved a man, saved his sister, and asks his older friend what is going on. But he does not know what to answer, and wonders, last time he defeated the blaster, now the girls were asleep, who is he? Meanwhile, Cashin himself was standing at another school and watching the students, seeing how the girls were very interested in something and were going somewhere. At this moment Moro says, now he is skipping his school near another one. After a while, the guy went to the store to get himself some water and saw 2 girls from school standing at the checkout and having a nice conversation with the seller. They asked if he was a model, and he replied that an ordinary student was on academic leave, and then they were interested in where his university was located. He smiles back at them and says how curious they are. Suddenly Cashin came up and asked him to calculate, and the girls were distracted by him. The seller immediately agrees and Cashin pays attention to him. He was a very cute student with glasses who smiled in response to our hero's request. Next, the seller calculates the price of water and says that it costs 3,200 won. When our hero took out the card, he noticed a book on the table called The Bride of Corinth. He carefully examined it while the seller put water in a bag. Unexpectedly, an elderly old man came into the store and asked if they were collecting waste paper. The student answered positively and asked to wait a little, as he was going to help the old man for something and thanks him. When the seller was taking out the waste paper, he brushed Cashin's shoulder, and at that moment Moros felt sorry for something. The student asked for forgiveness for this, and went to give the waste paper to the old man, which was watched by Cashin and Moros. After leaving the store and walking forward a little, Moros turns to Cashin. He needs to say something. Then the guy immediately asks him, "Is that salesman a villain, right?" This struck the spirit, and the guy explains. He immediately understood from his eyes. But the spirit responds, "They do not know if he is a bloodrain." Then Cashin tells Moros about The Bride of Corinth. "This is a novel about vampires and bloodrains," said then. "Don't be too happy. He will be the cause of his death." Repeating these words, the guy says, "It seems these are lines from that novel." This surprises the spirit, who says he even remembers this from a previous life. The guy replies that he was still addicted to reading books at the orphanage, and after he takes a sip of water, and says that they just have to check if they pulled the Joker out of the deck of cards this time. After a while, we are shown how the seller leaves the store after the shift. At that moment Cashin and Moros are already watching him. They have been following him for a long time and walking in the crowd. Moros asks, "Isn't this the way to that school for girls?" The guy remained silent and did not answer anything, and then wondered where he was going then. In parallel, there is that old man who is collecting waste paper, and our hero notices how a car is coming at him, and it can knock down an old man who is old to react to this. But fortunately Cashin was nearby, who saved him. The car stopped, and the driver immediately began to find out about the condition of the people. The old man was shocked, and then it dawned on the guy that he completely forgot about the seller, and eventually lost track of him. After that, our heroes are engaged in another business in one of the buildings, and Moros says that he does not know whether he should take his villainous form here. But the guy replies that there are no buildings with an open roof nearby. What else remains? In a villainous form, he is going to swallow a magic crystal and says how it was not worth being led to this provocation, after which, having accepted the crystal, his mana increased again, and he asks Moros to check something for him in his system. Moros also opens the status panel of our hero, and you can now see how Cashin's mana range is now 470. The guy notices that 2 more skills have appeared, shadow hiding, and shadow movement, and asks the spirit what it is. Then Moros explains that his skills develop with an increase in the amount of mana, and then the guy sparks, that is, "Can you improve your abilities by eating mana crystals?" Cashin thinks when he was a psyker, they could only improve their skills through training, and then he screams and asks, his mana count is only 470, but he ate 3 crystals, and the mana points went up by only 120, why so little? Then Moros assumes, apparently, his body has adapted to the mana crystals. The more he eats them, the less the effect, and someday he will approach the minimum. And then Cashin realizes, indeed, if mana could only be earned with crystals, it would be too easy, these guys would then be invincible. And he understands that if he wants to become stronger, he cannot rely only on crystals, he needs another way, at least the same training. Next, he asks Moros to show the information on the blood rain, and then Moros reminds him, this is the second time. He knows if he used the system 3 times in one day, and the guy replies that he knows. And our hero is shown a panel of bloodrain statuses, and his name was written there, and the possibilities of his awakening of villains, features psyche, trigger desire. His skills were blood step, blood cutter, blood sphere, hypnosis, intimidation, and the last one was mana range. After that, the guy asks about the blood step and assumes that this is the technique he used when they met. Then Cashin notices that he still has psychic powers, and Moros adds that this is his distinctive feature, also hypnosis, which our hero thought about and understood that it was not good. Meanwhile, in one of the hospitals somewhere in a remote office, a strange thing happens, and we see blood, and there were 3 doctors standing in front of a strange blood clot, who said, "My dear servants," and ordered them to bring them to him. It would be blood rain. Meanwhile, in the same hospital, nurses and 2 policemen were talking in the corridor, who guarded the ward where Minin was lying, and Nain was sitting next to her. Nain was flipping through the phone and looking for our hero in the list of villains of the famous lampas in this city. But there was nothing there, and she really wanted to know who the villain who saved her was. Suddenly, the girl was contacted by a doctor, and he says they have to examine on Minin, so they have to pick her up. But the girl wonders if this should be done at such a late time? He replies that this is a very important meeting and thinks that it would be better for her to go with them, but she did not understand why she should go too. Meanwhile, Cashin moved around the city in a very strange way. For this he used shadow concealment and movement. It turns out he can combine his abilities, and then Moros intervenes and says that you shouldn't be too happy. At the same time, our hero stops abruptly and Moros, who was watching him, announced that he was spending too much mana. He needed to use this ability only in certain circumstances. Upon hearing this, Cashin begins to get angry again from the fact that the spirit is giving out unsolicited advice. Soon he looks at the map and tracker and says that apparently it's here. He looks at the building and continues, of course, it was predictable. But this bastard Blood Rain went to the hospital for a schoolgirl. He was lucky enough to press the tracking button in time. Then he looks at the phone and remembers Nain's face, and something bothered him. After which he moved to that place saying that they need to hurry. Meanwhile, in the underground parking lot, Min Young was loaded into an ambulance, and Nang decides to ask why she should be loaded into an ambulance if they said they were going for an examination. Then the doctor replies that this is a very important check, which is not carried out at their hospital, but the girl still does not understand how this is so. Suddenly someone spoke behind her, this is a test of loyalty, after which the girl turned around and saw Bloodrain, who told her she was his future food, how glad he was to meet again, and this shocked Nain, who immediately shouted to the doctors that there was a villain and they needed to run, but they did not move and out of them a strange energy is emanating. They are all hypnotized by Bloodrain, and he says that they only obey him and soon she will become the same obedient puppet. At this moment, while he was talking, he got very close to her and was already touching her face. Nain is trying to resist and will not become a puppet while simultaneously pressing the call device. The villain says she is so brave, strong and strong-willed, and then decides that she may even become his bride. Suddenly someone shouted that he was crazy. What kind of nonsense was he talking? The girl and the villain were surprised by the inarticulate voice, and Bloodrain does not understand who could say this by letting the girl go. Behind Nain, someone tells her to duck for 3 seconds, at which point Bloodrain suspects our hero, after which the girl abruptly squats and Cashin jumps from under her back with his foot forward. He hits the villain and makes him fly away a couple of meters, but he covered his face with his hands and then decides to look out from under his hands and sees how the second leg is already flying at him, which breaks through the defense and hits right in the stomach. As a result of the blow, the Bloodrain pours into the wall and takes damage, saying that again our hero is in the way he should have killed Cashin already. The Piran does not listen to him and strikes again immediately after the last one. He hits the villain in the face, but he manages to dodge in the last second. Bloodrain takes his turn and uses a blood cutter, but does not hit the guy who passed under them and strikes directly into the stomach, driving him into the ground. He pretends for a moment as if he turned off, sharply brings his face closer and uses the skill, hypnosis, and thinks that our hero fell for his skill. Cashin stretches out his hand covering his face and asks, where is he looking? Then, holding him by the face, he strikes a bunch of blows at him, and then drives him into the ground. Why does he ask the villain? He was happy all this time and lived without worries. So it's time to punch him hard, and he gathers his strength in his fist. But Bloodrain starts laughing and our hero does not understand why he is amused. But he laughs, because that's all there is to laugh. Meanwhile, Nain watches them and trembles with fear, and Bloodrain tells Cashin he can't beat him, that's how he was created. But the guy did not hear his words and asked him what he said, after which suddenly Bloodrain begins to disappear right in front of our hero's eyes and laughs at the same time. As soon as Cashin noticed this, he immediately hit him, but it was too late and just broke the floor. Moros notices what an annoying opponent they have. Physical attacks are useless while he is in a state of blood, and Cashin understands this. If he had his flame now. If they hear someone who doesn't understand where they are and what's going on here, it was the doctors who were under hypnosis earlier. They were wondering why they were in the parking lot. The girl asks if they are okay, and watching them, Moros assumes that they have woken up after hypnosis. Cashin shouts at them to take the patients to a safe place faster, but they were scared when they saw the villain. Immediately after that, our hero runs away, but I forgive him to stop, but he does not have time and disappears. Cashin, on the other hand, directs to the exit from the parking lot, realizing that Bloodrain can't run far anyway and needs to catch him before it's too late. In parallel, it can be seen how the psychers we know head for the parking lot, and after a few moments the psychers meet our hero. Dun screams that there is a villain in front of them. He did not expect to meet them, but Kim Yukin recognized him and realized that this is the one who saved his sister. Lee Dun pulls out his sword and throws it using the legendary sword skill. Our hero asks what will attack so immediately and gathers strength in his fist. As a result, he beats off the sword and asks to get out of the way. The sword flies back to Dun, but he catches it right in front of Kim, who asked why he was standing like a pillar. The intern remembers how Cashin saved people where they did not have time, and his sister too. Then he remembers the funeral of his father, after which his eyes lit up with determination and says how to destroy all the villains. Next, he uses the flash skill directly at his hero, but he repels it with a shadow sword, saying that they are starting to infuriate him. At this moment, Lee Dun appears behind the guy. The guy notices it, but it's too late, since the guy manages to use the starburst and manages to hit our hero. Then he gives the go-ahead to Kim to finish him off. Kem Woo-chang, just as he was about to use the flash, remembered the face of his sister, who said how he saved her, and suddenly misses. At this moment, Cashin notices a chance to escape and uses it using two skills at the same time. As soon as our hero escaped, Lee Dun does not understand what is happening to Kim Woo-chang and asks if he has lost his mind. He also asks for forgiveness, and then Dun does not understand what is happening to Kim today. Then they did not understand what happened at all, as if everything was filled with shadows. Then they assume that this is an attribute of darkness. But this is the first time they have seen such a technique, and then Lee Dun asks how to report it to him. But Kim just didn't say anything, and the older friend notices the excitement of the young guy and takes him by the shoulder and tells him not to stand there and let him go to his sister. And the guy was silent for a while and agreed with this. Meanwhile, on the street, Bloodrain is upset that he missed those girls again, and it's bad. He could barely walk, because he was injured after a fight with Cashin, and at the same time he wants to drink. As expected, this was the same cellar. He had already come somewhere, and a bunch of different lights fell on him, after which he began to lick his teeth. He was standing in front of a club called Red Juice. He understands that if he goes there, he will be able to tire his thirst. Inside the club, everyone was dancing and having fun, and suddenly one of the girls on the dance floor collided with the villain. She notices blood on his shirt, and asks why he has blood on his shirt. Has he hurt himself somewhere? But he denies it, and says that Pratso is very thirsty, and then she offers him to buy some kind of cocktail. But he looked at her, and said that he needed something tastier, and immediately after that he bit her neck. Some time later, the car of the psychers we know was heading somewhere at high speed. The radio said about the emergency situation at the Red Juice Club. It was reported that a villain similar to Bloodrain would attack citizens. Lee Dun thinks he's crazy and very angry and asks if he's completely out of his mind. Kim Yukin did not understand what happened, and then Lee answers, Bloodrain attacked the locals. How long has it been possible? Uchin did not understand and remembers how he ran to his sister and asked her if she was okay. She immediately noticed him, and he asked if she was injured. And she told him again how he saved her. But her brother did not immediately understand what she was saying, and then she says again, then who saved her last time? He saved her this time. And the guy thought about her words while driving in the car. Meanwhile, our hero was standing in some alley and holding his wound, but Moros notices, it's good that everyone is alive. Then he says, then it seemed to him that he was not himself, but the guy does not understand what he is talking about. The spirit explains that this is not how he behaves when fighting villains. Is it really just because his opponent was psychers? After thinking about it, Cashin tells him in response that this will not happen again, and remembering his past life, he realizes that his enemies are not only villains. Moros notices the following, that his wound is almost healed, and suddenly something lit up. They did not understand what it could mean, and suddenly something from this tracker in his hand opens. We are taken to the club where Bloodrain is having fun, and there we see a bunch of corpses. Many were scared and afraid to move, and 2 psychers arrived there, who were just shocked. Bloodrain was sitting at the table and drinking a glass of someone's blood, and after the glass he said that now he had quenched his thirst, and that was great. Li Deng walks in and asks, how dare he do this to all these people? The villain orders him to be silent, and continues, it is better for him not to interfere while he recovers his strength. Dun notices several survivors and then instructs the intern to help the survivors and capture him. Immediately after that, the villain wounds Bokav and says that he is finished and sharply attacks the psychers. He used a spear of blood against them, but the guys react to this and Dun reflects the spear. At this moment Kim is going to attack back with his fire. But he is suspended by Dun, saying that this way he will hurt ordinary people. The boy was distracted by him for a second and Bloodrain says that it is not the time to worry about the rest. The villain appeared in front of Dun and, saying that they thought of themselves, attacks the senior psycher and drives him into the wall with great force. As a result, he knocks him out and immediately wants to finish him off by talking, but T is a wonderful ending and uses the bloody blow skill. After all this, he smiles with great pleasure, but Kim Yukin attacks behind him using his fire and caused an explosion. Bloodrain dodged and ended up behind him saying, it's a good technique, but what's the point of it if he can't hit anyway? The guy did not understand why he did not hit, and then the villain attacks him with a laugh. But the trainee manages to react and dodge, although he is still hurt. Immediately after that, he counterattacks with his foot, but he turns somersaults and jumps back a couple of meters. Then Uchwan falls to his knee. As the wound was not easy, he began to breathe heavily and move heavily. Blood was flowing from him and it was on the claws of the villain, who said that this was not enough. If he had hit more precisely, he would have broken all his bones. Kim realizes that he is too strong and it will be difficult to defeat him without fire magic. Meanwhile, Bloodrain says that he should not make such a sad face. Anyway, the hostages obey only him. Is he aware of this? Then he says his sister's name, and it shocks the young psycher. The villain tells him that he also has a sister who is engaged in modeling. He made some inquiries about her. This sweet and brave girl deceived even Bloodrain, because he thought that it was the villain with black hair who was her brother, which means that she needs to be properly punished for such a lie. Then, with great difficulty, Kim gets up and says if he does anything to his sister, he will kill him, and at the same time he collects fire in his right hand. Then Bloodrain smiles and thinks that he has been caught. Finally he will taste the blood of a furious psycher, and she is very special. Then he says how he sees that he believed in himself, and then he decides to give him a chance to stay alive. After that, they move to the construction site and then the villain says, this place is great for the two of them. He can fully use his powers, right? The guy replies, it would be very useful and clenches his fists. Meanwhile, Bloodrain thinks it's a great time. He can drain all his blood, enjoying the starry sky. After that, Kim attacks the villain saying that he will have to regret that he brought him here and uses the flash again. But Bloodrain stands as if nothing had happened and abruptly and gracefully dodges the attack. This surprised the young guy. After that, the villain sharply attacks him with his claws and wraps his neck around him, asking is this all he is capable of? It seems to Bloodrain that the young psycher is not trying at all and begins to pull him by the neck. Then he says that he has something to show and throws it against the wall with all his might. Meanwhile, someone else has arrived at the club. It was our hero who watched what happened and understands that this is a terrible sight. Then he notices the claw mark on the wall and begins to inspect it, realizing that it is very large. Moros also says that this is a trace of quite strong magic, and did it really make a Bloodrain? After that, a little to the left, he notices Li Dun, who is lying unconscious, and the guy recognizes this psycher. Cashin asks if Dun is dead, but Moros replies that he is still alive. Our hero remembers that Kim Yukin was with him and does not understand where he went. Meanwhile, Moros notices the sword and tells Cashin to look here. The guy asks what it is. Then the spirit responds, it's a magic weapon, and Cashin picks it up and tells him how he feels its energy. Then Moros tells the guy that this is their chance, and they need to get the magic crystal out of him. Our hero believes that it is really possible to do this, But this is Li Dun's thing and remembers how the psyker wounded him with this sword and says, although it doesn't matter. He used his hidden skill and pulled out 2 magic crystals, after which he swallowed both of them at once, and as a result, new incredible powers awoke in him. He felt something familiar, and after that he tells Moros that he doesn't even need to use his system, as he likes this feeling wildly. Meanwhile, there were unknown villains on the crane next to the construction site who watched the fight. The girls said that it was all for a long time and their boss asked them to wait a little. But the girls were very tired of these snacks. Meanwhile, Kim was fighting with Blood Rain. The guy used all his potential, but the villain easily coped with him and grabbed him by the fist. This shocked the young psyker very much, and there was simply no point in it. In parallel, the villain gathered his strength in his hands and hit Kim with it, which eventually knocked him out, but still did not lose consciousness. Bloodrain tells him that he is very weak and raising his claws, hinting at his demise, adds calling him a stupid creature who can only blame his weakness for this. He will absorb him with his body, so let him become a part of the great and live forever. After that, he starts laughing and abruptly someone behind him says, "It even hurts to look." It was Cashin and he had a completely different energy than before, and he adds, "Stop talking nonsense," and calls him a vile insect. After that, they stood and looked at each other and Bloodrain takes the floor. The boy with black hair, he's already starting to get bored. The guy tells him that he hears from someone who is always running away from the battlefield, but the villain laughs at these accusations and answers, now his condition is not the same as before. Having absorbed the blood of people, he has become much stronger. He raises his hand and adds, "The power overflows him, it is intoxicating, even if an S-class psyker comes, he will easily kill him." And our hero did not blink an eye and asked if it was true. Kim Woo-chang was watching them and realized that this was the same villain who had saved his sister. After that, Bloodrain collects an incredible amount of magic and prepares to attack and says, "Behold his invincible power," and this surprises the psyker, who thought he was not fighting at full strength when he fought with him. And Bloodrain attacks with a spear of blood. But our hero stands and does not move, after which abruptly these spears evaporate from the unknown power of Cashin. But one spear grabs his arm and Bloodrain immediately approaches him thinking that he is caught and attacks him. But suddenly our hero crouches down and the villain does not notice how he turns out to be behind him and says, "This is the end." At this time, a strange energy envelopes him and the villain decides to sharply hit him with his elbow, but misses again, as our hero ducked again. He simultaneously gathers strength in his fist and hits him in the face with all his strength, and immediately finishes him off with his foot with such force that he loses consciousness for a second. Immediately after that, our hero is going to strike again and at the same time reminds us how he said that he would show him invincible strength, and when will he show it? And at that moment, he hits him right in the face and the villain flies off a couple of meters. Such a fight surprised the young psyker very much. Uchin did not understand how this was possible, since Cashin was not like that at all in the hospital. Was he really hiding his real powers, and who was he anyway? Bloodrain can hardly move and spits blood. Cashin approaches him and reminds him how he said that even an S-class psyker would not be able to defeat him. At this point, Bloodrain begins to turn into blood again in order to escape, and our hero asked him about it. In response, the villain responds to him. Despite the relationship between them, he admits that he has become stronger, but physical attacks alone cannot kill him and tells him that his body can turn into blood. And he says that next time it will be different. But our hero abruptly interrupts him and says that there will be no next time and abruptly grabs him with a skill called shadow capture. Suddenly, he says that such garbage as he needs to be disposed of immediately, and after hearing this, everyone was very surprised, because our hero held a dark fire in his hand, after which he declared that the insolent man should be thoroughly fried. This scared the villain and at this moment the guy throws a skill called the Fireworks of Darkness at him. And then they show us the status window of our hero where they focus on his features. The fact is that there are 2 of them, darkness and dark fire. Then we are transferred to the hospital and YBC is transferred. After a fierce battle, the villain, known as Bloodrain, was arrested in Kadamgu. The famous killer, who is feared throughout the country, was caught by a young psyker Kim Yukin, and at that moment two psychers Lee Dun and Kim Yukin were watching the news. Dun, on the other hand, clapped Kim on the shoulder and told him how well he had tried, and they almost lost. But the guy replied that it wasn't him, and Dun didn't immediately understand. The young psyker was talking, he just called headquarters when it was over. In parallel, he recalled what happened after Cashin's victory over Blood Rain. Then the half-dead villain was held by the hair, and Kim looked at our hero and was surprised by his fire ability. He thought that he could only control shadows, but he has double strength, and Kim is seeing this for the first time. Next, Cashin turns to Uchin and says to quickly inform the police that Blood Rain has been caught. We are brought back to the present, where Uchin tells how he told everyone that he was not the one who caught Blood Rain, but in the end he was made out to be a hero, and then Dun asks, "Is this the guy who fought with the blaster?" Uchin confirms this by saying that it was our hero who caught the Blood Rain and sat in silence for a while. Dun asked, "So he feels guilty for not doing anything?" And the guy doesn't know how to answer, since it's true. Dun notices this and decides to defuse the situation and says, "Stop being sad. Because everything ended well, there will also be other villains. He will still have time to show his strength." Suddenly he jumps up and asks where his sword is. Kim answers, "The police said they would take care of him." This made Dun happy and calmed down, saying to the sword, "His beloved dad will be here soon." And meanwhile Kim was looking out the window and thinking about something. Meanwhile, somewhere near the school, a group of hooligans we already know gathered in the alleys and discussed the news about Uchkin. The blonde-haired bully says did they see how Kim Yukin dealt with the villain, and adds, "It's good that they didn't go to the club yesterday. Otherwise they would have been killed." And the bespectacled man answers him, "Did he see his face in the mirror?" After that, they started laughing, but their main concern was something else entirely, and he asked Kwok if he remembered the guy they wanted to beat up. Kwok remembers him, because our hero kicked him right on the head. Then, he is still being treated. Then the leader breaks down and starts shouting, asking if he will give him more money for medicines. The Kwok throws out a cigarette and speaks as it is and asks what he is yelling at all. Then the leader asked if Kwok was really going to leave everything as it is. "We need to call the guys and get together. They need to take revenge." But Kwok will not do this, and the leader did not understand at all why he decided so. He asked for the pride of the Kwok, but the latter asked a counter question, "Does he really think that that type is so simple?" Kwok tells me honestly, he is afraid of that guy even more than Kim Uchin, who catches dangerous villains. Those eyes were inhuman, and from the mere memories of the bully, he shudders. The leader, hearing this himself, came to fear. At that time, in class 3-1, the students were discussing all the same things from the news about Kim Yukin and how cool he was. They had goosebumps from him. Moros watched him and noticed that today everyone was so noisy because of the events that followed. But our hero did not pay attention to this, and said he would like to meet them, and at the same time remembered about the raven and the driver. He had to check something with them, and Moros is interested in what exactly needed to be checked, but our hero did not answer him. Meanwhile, in the area of the villains, someone was painting graffiti, and it was a young girl who also glued strange stickers, after which a cleaner appeared behind her, who stood and was silent. She felt him and began to smile. At that time someone came to the shelter where he was and was doing something. He tells the guests to say hello when entering someone else's house. These were the villains who watched our hero's battle with Bloodrain earlier, and the main group said that the driver was very dirty and advised him to clean up a little. One of the girls who were with the man says that the driver stinks of dampness. The driver answers them that they just came, and they are already talking nonsense. But the fact is that he called them himself, and the villain turned on the fool, saying that he did not understand what they were talking about. Then he poured drinks for the guests, and asked if they had seen him fighting. Then the man replies that of course they saw everything, as if they went to a movie. They did not want to look away until the very end. This was said by an A-rank villain named Royal Gannet. His class was dedicated and his skill was fossil. Then the driver is interested in his opinion about the film, after which the girls who came from Gannet answer. One answered, "There was no normal script, no thought-out story, and too many clichés." The second girl also confirmed these words. They were villains of a rank named Aroma and Otto. Aroma had a hunter class and a smart wind. Otto had an enlightened class and a poison skill. Gannett wipes Otto's cheeks from the cookies and says how he liked it unlike them. He stated that the main actor showed himself perfectly. Gannett seemed to see a shining black diamond, and the driver replied to him that he would consider it a compliment. Then Gannett asked, how else did the driver know, and therefore sent them there? Because he has two elements. The driver was immediately interested in what he had heard, and then he got up and began to think about what he had heard while the guests were just looking at him and waiting for his words. The villain started talking, now it's clear, and then Gannett was surprised and realized that the driver was actually unaware. He replies, as he assumed, that he is not like the rest of the villains, and then Gannett made sure that he did not know after all. Then the guest says how for the first time he hears about a villain with two powers, and then he is interrupted by the driver, who said that this was possible, and everyone was surprised to hear this. The driver tells them it was a long time ago, such existed back in the era of myths. Meanwhile, we are taken to the street, and there our hero thinks, Vilzen is not a prison for villains, only a place where they can move with a calm soul, without fear of running into a psyker. In general, this is a haven for everyone except psychers. After passing on, Cashin says he still won't get used to this place, and Moros listened to him in silence, after which he was greeted with words that he was on time. It was the driver who noticed that our hero had somehow changed, and he was really glad to meet them. Some time later, in one of the pubs in Wilson, the villains were sitting at the bar and our hero was served a wonderful drink. Then the driver tells him that there is a very tasty grapefruit aid and offers to drink, and then look around in the Wilson. Then he remembers something else and gives the box and says that this is a reward as promised. And immediately after that, he turns on his glasses and notices how Cashin's mana has increased. Did he really get real crystals? But our hero fell on a fool asking where he would get them from. Then the driver analyzes him and thinks, he didn't understand how the guy did it. Last time there were only 300 mana, but now he has more than 500. He wouldn't have been able to level up like that by eating the crystals the driver gave him. Could it be related to his powers? At this point, Cashin wonders where the driver gets the crystals from. Who is the supplier? And then someone intervenes in the conversation by answering who he is. It was a bartender named Ujiha. His class was a summoner, and the smartest was the order. He uses his power to take the dyeing for the dish and put it on a plate with sandwiches, and this thing was very similar to Cashin. After that, he gives the plate to the guy and says it's a gift to their dear guests. The driver says that this man is the owner of the pub and he is an outer. Outers are psychers who did not join the Lampas service. Next, the driver asks to sell them cheaper crystals, but Ujiha replies that it's already nowhere cheaper, calling him an expensive customer. But the villain did not back down and thought that a discount could be made for friends, but the outer separated business and personal. Our hero was watching them and thinking about the outer and the Wilson. He must have an interesting story behind him. Then he turns to outer asking, can he also buy crystals? Eugene responds positively, but on one condition, if he is a resident of Vilzon. The guy is interested in what it means to be a resident of the Vilzone, and then the driver tells him to move to the Vilzone. Our hero asks again about this. Does the villain really want Cashin to move in and work for him? But the villain offended and said, if he doesn't want to, then don't. Then he explains, first you will need to take a test, in which he will show who is who. He can also become the boss, and at this time we are shown someone drinking alcohol in the background. The outer asks, does the driver really want to quit his position? And the guy replies that he has been wanting to do this for a long time, but the outer does not understand this. Cashin is not interested in what he says to the driver, but he does not understand why. The boss of the villa has a lot of privileges, but he still does not need it, and he offers the driver to remain the boss, since everything is so good. But the villain does not give up and tells Cashin he can give any commands if he is the boss. He will have subordinates and an awesome training room. But the guy repeats how he doesn't care about it, and then the outer adds how he can get any crystals on the black market, and at that moment our hero became interested. He looked at him, and then the thought came to him that he was the black market trader, and then he notices another person next to him at the bar thinking they must be serious guys. Next, the driver adds that there will still be a salary corresponding to his activity, But this is secret information. But our hero is interested in how much money we are talking about, and then the villain tells him to give an ear and he will tell. When he whispered to him, he was sharply shocked by what he heard, and then the driver sits contentedly looking at our hero, and the guy looked at him without understanding what he was up to, and the outer was watching. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Vilzen, the Black Hand was eating a sandwich and complaining that it was not tasty and in general the meat was inside. Then he breaks down and tramples on the food, asking how much more he has to eat such filth. He wants a chicken burger and adds another one about Burger King. Then another B-rank villain named Crash takes his word. His class was a striker and his skill was strength. He says how he loves pizza, but he can't remember the last time he ate it. But the Black Hand screams at him and reminds him how he trashed the pizzeria in Vilzen, to which he replied how he could not stand pizza with pineapples. Suddenly, someone turns to them saying that it's not the time to talk about pizza right now, and it was another B-rank villain named Cutter. His class was an assassin and the wind skill. The Black Hand did not understand anything and asked. He was crazy about life in Vilzen, but he immediately answers how he found someone. Then the Black Hand is interested in whom he found? The Cutter replies that he found the one whom the Black Hand attacked earlier, and who knocked him out with a blow, which surprised the guy very much, because he immediately remembered that moment. He immediately got angry and asked his location, to which Cutter replied that he was sitting in a pub with a driver and the villain did not understand why they were sitting together. Cutter suspects that the Black Hand has already decided to go after him, which is confirmed by the Black Hand, but Cutter recalls how the driver imposed a ban on fighting in the Vilzen and the Black Hand continues saying how he will violate it today. A little earlier, Driver and Cashin decided to walk through the Will Zone and they meet someone strange who was digging the ground. Then the driver explains how this guy's name is an earth dog and he loves to dig the ground, and there was a cleaner behind him, and he's a killer of every speck of dust. Both of them are crazy, but absolutely harmless. They will not attack first, but they can fight back, which is why they are needed in Vilzen. Kasi-san followed him and listened at the same time thinking, this is not how he imagined the villains and all because of the driver. Next, he asked why he had instructed him to catch Bloodrain? And then the driver responds, as they have traitors, he needed to trick the traitor around his finger by choosing a person who is not related to either him or Vilzen. If he didn't know, villains also have their own divisions, like psychers, those who follow the rules, and those who spit on them and create their own coalitions. And then Cashin asks, how does he say that there is a connection between Bloodrain, Vilzona and the traitor? Then the driver responds, Bloodrain is just a pawn in a big game. He is sure that there is something more behind him and they want to bring Wilzone to an end. But Cashin is not interested in this, and the driver also knew that the guy would answer for it that way, and he likes him, after which he seriously offers to become a resident of Vilzen. But the guy still thinks it's nonsense. The driver says how he puts his life on the line, and really asks him about it. That evening, in one of the restaurants, our hero's sister stood and worked checking alcohol on the list, but her thoughts were all for her younger brother. Since she gave him the card, they never managed to talk. Suddenly, one of the waiters was looking for manager Kwan Yuri and tells her how the director was looking for her. Further on, they show how the director talked to someone on the phone about Yuri, saying what a great employee she is, so there shouldn't be any problems. On the other side, they replied how pleasant it was to hear about a worthy person and was looking forward to meeting her, while the director was sorry to give away a valuable employee. The person on the phone, after such words, considers himself guilty by taking her away, and at this moment Kwan Yuri enters the director's office. The director says that she is already here and ends the conversation. From the other side they show us a man who is waiting with a smile to meet a new employee. Meanwhile, in the director's office, the director himself hands over an invitation letter and says that she received a letter from the American department. Thanks to her hard work, she was sent to the main office, and then the girl was very surprised. The director says that the company will pay not only for the plane ticket, but also for apartments close to the place of work. The girl was joyfully shocked. The director considers this a great chance and will she go? As soon as she was about to give consent, she immediately remembered her younger brother and did not answer, because she did not know how to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Our hero was walking through the ruined city of Vilzen and recalled a conversation with the driver, how he put his life on the line by offering our hero to settle in Vilzen. While he was standing there thinking about it, Moros noticed how interested he was in the idea and asked if he liked his suggestion. But the guy doesn't answer anything and abruptly notices a black hand in front of him, and Crash is standing next to him, who asked if it was him. They looked at him with a threatening look, and our hero says, as he sees, "One rat is hiding here," and looks away. There is a cutter hiding around the corner, who could not believe that he was discovered, and then he realizes that Cashin is really an unusual villain. Then Crash starts getting angry and saying how he pisses him off and wants to blow his head off right now. But the black hand stops him and tells him to keep his turn, since he is the first. After that, he starts to get angry and say how our hero is now going to find out what will happen to those who mock him. The guy stood calmly and could not remember any bullying. Moros asks Cashin to be careful, since they can attack together. As soon as the black hand is about to attack, and at that moment a cup flies out of nowhere and falls right between the villain and Cashin. The black hand could not understand anything, and then the unnatural one asks, "Is it possible to treat guests like that?" It was a B-rank villainess named Juak. Her class was a striker, and her skill was strength. The black hand asks in a high-pitched tone if she's still here and immediately tells her not to interfere. She replies that she just reminds them that they are breaking the law. It is forbidden to gather in groups and attack in Vilzen, but Crash is infuriated by her, and the black hand answers her that he is not yet a resident of Vilzen. At this point, someone adds that he will soon become one, and then the feathers of crows appeared around. Then everyone looked up and there was a crow sitting there. Her appearance surprised everyone and especially the black hand, and after all she starts smiling and asks, "So will they leave him alone or not?" Some time later, our hero's sister came home after work. She turns on the light in the living room and wonders if her brother is already asleep or not. Then she is going to knock, but stops abruptly because she remembered how she was given an invitation letter thanks to her hard work. She stopped for a couple of seconds and then decided to throw the bag and go to the shower and sleep herself. But after throwing the bag, the same invitation fell off her. The next morning, our hero with a weight of 10 kilograms went for a run, and the weight was also on his hands and with a mask on his face. People around him were surprised by this and could not believe that he could safely run with this weight. Meanwhile, Moros watched him and said that sandbags for weight are not so heavy, it's just a regular workout. But Cashin replied that they are great for both physical and physical development. Now there will be no one-on-one battles. There may be situations when several opponents will attack him at the same time, and against such there is nothing more effective than physical exertion, and Moros considers this a wise judgment. In parallel, he remembers last night when he met the Black Hand and the others. Crash then said that in order to become a member of the Vizlona, you need to take a test, and then asked if he should also take it, like everyone else. The Black Hand became enraged, and said what kind of man he should turn him in, since the villain would kill him right now. At this moment, our hero responds. Exactly 10 days later he offers to conduct a test, and then the Black Hand and Crash look at each other. After hearing about 10 days, Juak says her word. She wants to explain the rules to our hero. The test takes place in the form of a one-on-one battle. Murder is allowed only in exceptional circumstances, and yet, his first opponent will be her, Juak. She added, "Let the party begin," and after that they both looked at each other. Returning to the present, our hero thought, in fact, he does not want to become a villager. In parallel with his thoughts, he was practicing on the horizontal bars and everyone around was watching him, marveling at his strength. The guy understood that only by becoming a villager, he could become stronger and take revenge on all those S-rank psychers and the entire Lampas. Clutching a towel in his hand, he continues, even if he goes to hell, this is the path he has chosen. As he is about to leave, he suddenly notices something and throws his vision in the direction of two twins who were training on the same site. After that, he ran towards the house and one of the girls tells the other how the guy is trying and she clarifies, is her sister talking about our hero? She confirms this and asks not to tell Gannett about it, after which it turned out that it was Aroma and Otto. After a while, Cashin was already at home taking a shower after training, and coming out of the shower he thought about his sister, Was she still asleep? Then he notices the mess that she has tripled and decides to clean up, not understanding where she was in a hurry. In the mess he notices an invitation letter from the American office. At this moment Yuri comes out still yawning from sleep and says that she got up so early. Then she wakes up abruptly, noticed how our hero was writing a letter and asked with a raised tone, "What is he watching here?" Next, she asks if he had time to read it, and the guy confirms this by talking about the invitation to America, and then the sister replies that he should not worry, since she will not go. But our hero does not understand why she refuses to go, and then she asks in response, how else does he ask this, should she leave him alone, or what? But Cashin replied that he could handle it perfectly, it would even be more convenient, and then she asks what kind of nonsense is he talking about. She keeps asking, can he cook his own meals, do the laundry and cleaning? It is also necessary to sort garbage and other all sorts of duties. At this moment the guy was a little mad that she thinks he is not independent. Then he answers her, he's not a child, he's old enough for all this, especially since he's done everything before, but she doesn't understand him, since he's only 19 years old, he's in the 3rd year of high school and can't leave him. At that moment, he turns to her and with a face full of confidence tells her to go, and when will there ever be such a chance? He tells her to do what she really wants, and she looked at him with complete, and did not know what to say to that. Meanwhile, in the Vilzen, the cutter says how the week is left and asks if that guy is definitely coming, right? But the Black Hand did not immediately understand who it was and the cutter was responsible for, the guy who would fight with Jwack. But the Black Hand was not going to wait and wanted to deal with him sooner. Next, Cutter mentions the conversations of other villains that the driver himself supports him, and then the Black Hand calls him a sycophant. But Crash looks at him and says how he was always hanging around the driver. This infuriated Black Hand, who thought that Crash wanted to die, but he asked him to calm down, although it was clear how he hit the nail on the head. Cutter asks, if he fights Jwack in the first round, will it be their turn? The Black Hand responds, if she wins, it will be fun of course, but this time he will be on the side of this guy. Because he personally wants to take revenge, he will still get it from him. The Black Hand said all this. That afternoon, our hero was sitting in his room at the computer, and Moros asked him if he was really letting her go to America. Cashin replies that this is a good opportunity for her, but Moros is sure that this is not the only reason, and then our hero remained silent at first. Then he replied that he thought this was the best option for the two of them and that he was not talking like Cashin, but like Quan Kanu. But he can handle it alone, Moros asks, to which the guy responds. Of course, he had lived before that somehow. The spirit says he asks this because he sees in his search engine how to cook food, and the guy says that he will start with Korean cuisine or maybe with European. Meanwhile, his sister was sitting on the floor in the room and staring at the letter. Thinking about all this, she recalled the words of the director and her brother about such a chance, which rarely comes. Suddenly, she is called several times and wakes up from her own thoughts. In fact, she was sitting in a bar with her friends and thought about her problems. Her friends asked her why she was in the clouds, and the other called the waiter to make an order. Half of which they assumed that something had happened to her, and thought that things were in the guy, and she was worried about him. Then they asked about him. Yuri waited for half an hour and was sad. The girls insisted that she tell, and even one wanted to help with advice, and the second closed her mouth, asking her to shut up, as it was necessary to show tact. They were brought beer and then they all decided to drink, with alcohol, and the conversation would go like clockwork, after which they began to drink. Some time later, at Yuri and our hero's house, the girl was drunk and could hardly walk. Kusina picked her up and asked about her condition and why was there so much to drink. But she denied it, saying that she was like a piece of glass and hiccuped in parallel. Then she took him by the face and wanted to cuddle in parallel, saying how handsome he had become, and Moros realized that she was completely intoxicated. After all, he put her on the bed and was about to leave as she began to say in a dream that he was such a cute baby when he ran after her everywhere as a child. She still can't get used to the fact that he is already quite an adult, no longer a boy, but a man. At this moment, Cashin remembers Jeff, who asked him when he had just managed to grow up like this. This warmed the soul of our hero, and looking at his sister, who reminded him of Jeff, he sheltered her. The next morning, she woke up with a headache and realized that she had overdone it yesterday. Then she noticed soup with a note on the table. It was from Cashin, and it said how she cooked her soup for a hangover, asked her to eat it with rice while warm and rest. With love to Kanu, and also add from below that he is no longer a baby. We are transferred to the arrow pot where Yuri asked not to starve him, to eat 3 times a day. She will call in the morning and in the evening, and asked to always pick up the phone. Then she continued so that she would always be careful. There are so many terrible things happening in the world. But the guy told her not to worry too much about him. But she asked if he wouldn't worry in her place, and ends the conversation with a request to call her if something happens, and she was so worried anyway. Then our hero tells her to call too, and he will immediately fly to America. After that, he looked at her with pride and calmness, as well as she, although she was sad to part. Then she already leaves for the plane and says how she will call as soon as she lands. Then he looked at the plane in which she was and was on her way to new trials in America, and thought about his own, which were waiting for him very soon. Already in the evening of the same day, everyone has already gathered for the test of our hero. In parallel, the rules are told. The fight is considered completed when one of the parties declares a loss or is recognized as incapacitated. In general, Cashin needs to win 3 battles, but the driver did not understand only why our hero dressed up like that. He would still get dirty, and even if he lost, there would be no punishment. Then the driver says that even the guy can challenge him if he wants to. Our hero says that it is too noisy and suggests starting already. Then the driver asks about the readiness of the Jwack, and she confirms it. Meanwhile, Moros tells Cashin to get ready, as she looks strong, but the guy is confident that he can handle her. Further, the cutter lists the advantages: speed, strength and endurance. Taking into account all these factors, we can say that 100 Jwack is a serious opponent, a master of hand-to-hand combat, trained in combat sambo, an opponent who knows his strengths. A virus attack won't work with her. In general, this guy is going to have a terrible start, Cutter believes, so there will be something to see here. The driver gives permission to start the battle, and Jwack rushes forward with the words, "They will start faster, they will finish faster." But at this moment, the shadow shackles grab her, and she does not understand what is happening. Then she is shouted that the enemy is on top and there is no one there. But at the same moment, Cutter warns Jwack, her enemy is ahead. She notices him and his energy right in front of her, as a result of which our hero knocks her out with a kick. The driver was upset that no one underestimated the guy, and the rest were shocked to see Jwack lying unconscious after just one blow. Cashin stands in front of the others and tells them that the next one is coming out. The Black Hand did not believe what he saw and was greatly shocked, since Jwack is one of the most powerful villains of Whistlezone, and he knocked her out in the first round. Cashin asked the next one to come out, saying that he does not want to waste time, while the Black Hand wonders who he is anyway. The guy asked who wanted to fight with him, let him come out, and Crash tells the Black Hand that his name is. Suddenly, we are shown a flying arrow that flew into the ground in front of Cashin, and the guy looked in surprise in the direction from where it came. The man who let her in tells the young villain not to get arrogant because of one victory, since he is the best archer in Villezone, Red-Eye, after which he calls on him to fight with him. Meanwhile, somewhere in an abandoned building, someone was discussing something, saying how he didn't think it was true and asked not to worry about the bloodline. Anyway, they didn't expect anything special from him. Just ask him for Wilson, and he replied she would break up very soon and asks to rely on him, calling another person the chairman. This person begins to smile and say that he will definitely contribute to this. Meanwhile, a real battle broke out in Villezone with huge destruction. Arrows flew one after another, first the first, then the second, then the third, and they all flew after our hero, who was running away from them. Suddenly he finds himself at the building from which he jumped and dodged the arrow, and at that moment he is told that he was caught, and then Cashin turns around and sees a red eye above him. The villain was preparing to shoot, as a result of which he shot 3 arrows at once, and our hero does not have time to dodge them. He tries to block them with his hand to get less damage, and an explosion occurs. Red Eye lands on one of the roofs and says he's not as cool as they said he was. Suddenly, a large amount of strange force comes out behind him and our hero flies out of the door. Red Eye saw him and realized how all this time he was the hunter, and he immediately raises his hands saying that he gives up and our hero stops. Then he asked, upset, why he was giving up, but he replied, he had already caught him, that's all. Cashin couldn't believe he was giving up so easily by calling him a jerk, but Red Eye didn't understand why he was a jerk and said how sincerely he was giving up. Further, the villain explains that if the driver had not asked him, he would not have come here, and at that time a drone was hanging over them through which the driver was watching them. The guy asked if the driver really asked for this, and Red Eye replied that he did not want serious injuries on the test, and then gave him a box with the name, DSP. Cashin is interested in what he just received, and the villain responds to him, this is a desire suppression patch. All villains in Vilzen have one. He can attach it behind his ear and there will be an effect. It is flesh-colored, so it does not stand out. Cashin listened to him and thinks that they were introduced to villains' prisoners in prisons, but in the form of a patch he sees them for the first time and he wonders who makes them? Next, Red Eyes says that his next opponent is the Black Hand. He is harmful and rude, but in general a good guy. Also the villain hopes they will not stab each other too much. The guy remembers all his actions and asks again, is he really good and in what place is this? After that, they show us the Black Hand itself and Crash asks him who he thinks will win and where did the driver and the crow go to. Cutter says now he doubts their victory, he's good at one-on-one combat, maybe Jwack is just weaker than him as a woman. Also, he does not think that the problem is gender, yet he has enough strength to knock her out in the first round. At this moment, from these arguments, the Black Hand breaks down and tells the Cutter to stop thinking, because he believes that he is just lucky and all fools are lucky. But the Cutter asks him a question, does he really think it's just luck? Then Crash asks, if that's the case, if it's hard to beat him one-on-one, then how about 3 against 1? Cutter supports this idea, but not the Black Hand asking, he's completely crazy, does he really want to request a group attack? At that moment, someone asked again about the group attack and it was Jwack, who had just woken up and immediately started saying that even a lion on a buffalo hunt was calling his friends for help. The Black Hand starts to get mad and say how she completely lost her fear, since he put him down in 1 round and for whom she takes him at all, also what kind of lion he is a great tiger who hunts alone. The Black Hand is very wound up and Crash asks him to calm down, but the guy shuts his mouth because he starts to piss him off. Jwack says that she did not come here to joke, this is a test only in words, but in fact a trap for people like them. She and Red Eye are seriously talking to him and he, who will be knocked out in the final, they are all here just to make that guy look better against their background, explains Jwack. The Black Hand is shocked and does not understand what she is saying now, and she asks him to finish listening first. Next, she tells how she heard the driver talking in the pub, and he said then that he wanted this guy with shadows to become the next boss of Wilzone. This shocked everyone and they did not believe him, especially the Black Hand saying that this is complete nonsense, and does she even know how many people are aiming for this place? But she was not alone in the pub at that moment, and the villain can ask around and then the Black Hand completely wilted from this information saying that it is impossible for the driver to give him his place. Jwack remembers how she was knocked out recently, and starts to get angry and says, he's a stranger who doesn't even know anything about local life, how can they give Wilson to him? And he keeps asking if the Black Hand really can't believe that the driver is patronizing him? And he concludes that this is not the driver they all knew and puts an end to these disputes, since they need to decide, they all need to show this guy where his place is. And then everyone focused on the word them, and after that Jwack starts smiling and answers them, as she brought her friends, the more people, the more fun. Meanwhile, on the plane where Cashin's sister was, they served dinner and wished a pleasant appetite to Yuri, who thanked her for it. She was watching the time and she still had so long to fly, going on to dinner and looking out the window and thinking for Kanu, and hoping that he was eating well. Meanwhile, our hero was eating a sandwich, which gave him a red eye and says that he should eat normal food, then he will always be healthy. Then the guy looks at the sandwich, and says that it tastes like garbage and the drizzle asks, does he think that villain is up to something? To this Cashin replies, Jeff has always said to be careful with those who are kind to you for no reason. Suddenly, the guy notices someone approaching him, and it was a black hand. Then the guy says that he is his next opponent. The black hand asks our hero what he's doing with the driver, but Cashin doesn't understand what this means, and then the black hand breaks off with the question, what did the guy do to him? At this second, Crash will attack from the back, but our hero manages to dodge, and immediately after that a cutter appears behind our hero's back to attack, but Cashin manages to counterattack the cutter again. Cutter at that moment thought, a counterattack in such a situation, Cashin is really something, after which he lands on his feet and our hero starts smiling and asks further. They could not win the duel, so the three of them attacked, decided to take the number, not the force? Then the mug flies at the guy again, but he dodges it with ease and immediately after that notices Jwack in front of him, who asked him, 3 is not enough, right? She got as close as possible and used the drunken jerk skill and hit our hero. Meanwhile, somewhere on the roof of the villa, the driver and the crow were sitting. The driver says that the day is coming to an end and Cassiano is interested. The crow asks, he wants to know how his pet is doing, a black kitten. The driver did not understand this nickname, and then she explains that he is still very small, and then it comes to the driver. The guy does not even have the name of the villain, and begins to wonder what to call him. The crow says that he is too much interested in him, it's even envious somehow. If the driver was so interested in the crow, she would repay him for such interest. But the villain misses it with a mime of his ears and asks, so what villainous name to come up with for their new friend? At this moment, Red-Eye appears and asks if they really have a date on the roof. The driver realized that he had just returned and praised him for his good work, while the crow asked him to leave as soon as possible. Next, the villain asks Red-Eye how their duckling is doing. Red-Eye didn't understand who he was being asked about, and suddenly the driver turned on his glasses and noticed something that puzzled him. Crow and Red-Eye asked what was going on there, and then the driver turns on his glasses to full and directs his vision towards our hero. Meanwhile, someone is texting with a winter dog, who asked where they were and was answered. This was written by a girl who had painted on the walls of the villa earlier, and at that moment something shone with a bright light away from the girl, which she noticed. It was Cashin's battle against a group of villains, and at that moment he flies into the wall taking damage, and immediately after that Crash flies at him offering to try another blow, but the guy approaches him with incredible speed and grabs his hammer, then holding his hammer he strikes back. At this moment, a black hand flies at him, wishing him death, but as a result it misses and Cashin is behind him. Then he grabs him by the scarf and hits him with his knee in the back of the head and finishes off with his hand in the face. Crash, seeing this, will attack from behind, but the guy easily kicks him off so that he flies away, and at that moment Jwack attacks from behind and our hero manages to dodge, ducking again. After the blow has passed him, he jumps over her and grabs her head. As a result, he strikes her head with his knee. As a result, Jwack and Crash lay unconscious. The black hand could hardly move and looked at our hero thinking how pompous a fool he was. But at the same time, he was too strong. Crash, having come to himself, lay and thought that they were already finished. The black hand could not believe how he could lose to this man. Then Crash asks him if he is alive. The black hand did not answer him and could not believe in the power of our hero. He wondered where this monster came from. Meanwhile, the guy looks away, and there came more villains of the C-rank Hemaboy, Archer class and with the fossil skill, also a B-rank villain named Pointer, Night class and Fire skill. Winter says what an unusual guy, and Chemoboy adds that it's even more interesting to hunt this way. Moros notices that there are more and more of them, and Cashin tells him it's time to get rid of these midges. This angered the Pointer and he asked who the guy called midges, but at that second our hero opened his eyes wider and suppressed the Pointer, who is afraid of the sinister energy. But suddenly someone appears behind them at high speed saying to step aside and adds, Defender of Order, Iron Mask, enters the battle. He was a B-rank villain named Iron Mask, Striker class and smart to order. Then he rushes with all his might and jumps right at our hero with the words that he will administer justice in the name of Vilzen. The villain flies into the guy with all his might, but he dodges and he flies into the wall with devastating force. Immediately after that, The Hima-boy attacks with his hammer, saying that the hunt has begun and uses a hammer blow, but the guy dodges them and begins to move with incredible force right at the Hima-boy. Point abruptly appears in front of him and Hima-boy tells him not to climb and let him not dare to cover him. But he does not listen to him and tells Cashin how he will show him what real fire is and uses a fire spear. Our hero at this time begins to collect the dark flame in his hand, and this surprised the pointer. The guy uses the dark fire against him. Both villains were shocked by what they saw and wondered where he got such power from. Crash thought that his class was enlightened, but suddenly they grab him by the hair and ask, "What are they all worth?" Jwack shouts to everyone not to waste time and attack, after which he launches a crash at our hero and immediately throws a huge mug collecting a huge amount of power in it, wishing him only death. Cashin uses the shadow sword and cuts the mug, and immediately after it Crash appears with his hammer. The guy, noticing him, takes the sword with his hand and repels the blow with Crash's hammer, forcing him to fly away, and immediately catches up with him and attacks with his foot. The Black Hand watched this and could not believe that he was capable of all this. He did not hesitate. Who was he? Then he began to tremble with guesses. He wondered if they were not hunting him, but he was hunting them? Suddenly, our hero is wrapped in some kind of fetters, and it was another B-rank villain named Binder, a support class and a darkness skill, who said how he knew that the guy would fall into his net. Cashin tried to break free, but he couldn't, and the villain told him not to waste time and not to break it. His networks connect not only the physical body, but also the intentions and desires that appear in his head. Besides, they both have the element of darkness, so you cannot resist. Then our hero realizes that he has poison and cannot move at all, but the Moros calls him. At this moment, the Binder says, "Let him watch as his own fear consumes him," and wishes him to go to hell. Then all the villains pounce on him, wishing him only death. They say, to know their strength, and Winter hits him with a spear. But the guy stopped him by taking the spear with his hand, and at this moment the Iron Mask will attack for the sake of peace in the Vilzan, as it is necessary to get rid of dirt, and with words, for patience, he attacks our hero in the back. Jwack, at this moment, praises for excellent words and also attacks, hitting him in the stomach. The boy began to spit blood. Then Crash and all the rest joined in. It already looked like a beating. They all wanted him dead, and he was close to it. The last words he heard were that he was a weakling. Then deep in his mind, someone turned to him asking if that was all? He also called our hero a weakling and said, stealing his body, is that all he's capable of? And then he admits, if it's true, then he better die. Cashin begins to remember everything that happened to him, and suddenly all the villains see a huge force that is about to be released. Moros was also scared at that second. At that moment, the driver, along with Crow and Red Eye, were heading to the scene with incredible speed. The Crow asks if the driver thinks he's overreacting. She believes that it is unlikely that something bad happened there, and the driver hopes for it. It would be good for him. But it's better to check. He doesn't need unnecessary sacrifices. The villain answers, and suddenly strange sounds are heard from there. It alerted everyone, and the driver says, and yet, it seems that something bad happened. At the scene, a group of villains stood in shock and did not understand what was happening. Cashin stood in front of them, who released an incredible force. At this moment the Binder says stop waiting and rushing other villains. Jwack listened to him and attacked with words so that no one would be afraid. A little more and they would finish him off. Cashin, on the other hand, summoned the shadow sword with just one wave of his hand and broke all the bonds and all the villains behind them. He struck with his strength at a great distance, and this threw all the villains away. Jwack lay after the blow and looked at him, calling him crazy. Our hero began to talk about how he needed revenge and he was not ready to die in this cursed place. In parallel, he released a huge amount of power. The driver and the others arrived at the scene. The Crow immediately asked the question, is there really a duckling in the center of them? The driver starts analyzing him and says his magic has exceeded 2,000 asks. This greatly surprised the Kara-eye and the Crow. Then the Red-eye thought, if his magic exceeded 2,000, then this is a cataclysmic level. The Crow prepares for battle and asks what to do. She doesn't even know how to stop him, but the driver is silent and watches him closely. Meanwhile, Moros is trying to reach out to the Kashians and asks if he is really that bad. He asks him to remember what they are here for, but he only growls in response, and then Moros, with all the power of his voice, asks Kashian to wake up. When he came to his senses, and this surprised Moros, Kashian turns to him and says, did he really think that he had lost control of himself forever? And he adds to him, don't you dare doubt him, and shows him the DSP, after which Moros says that he should thank Red Eye for him. The driver immediately noticed and tells the others that he seems to have come to his senses, but the crow adds, it's even a pity, such a show was planned, they would have seen his true strength. Then the driver started to analyze him again and noticed how his mana points became the same. After that he wondered if it really was an ordinary explosion. Meanwhile, Moros is interested in the condition of the Kashians, which he asked about. The guy replied that he only felt dizzy. Next, he casts his gaze at the villains in front of him and asks if they want to continue fighting with him. Jwak tried to get up and continue the fight, but someone from the outside said they were giving up. It was the Black Hand who admitted defeat, but Jwak had a different opinion and shouted at him to speak only for himself, since she could still fight. But the Black Hand in a commanding tone told her that he also surrendered, but she still denied it, and then the villain grabbed her and hit her in the face. He asks her to stop and asks her straight to her face, is she so ashamed to admit defeat, is there really no pride left? She calls him a jerk and says, just a little bit more and they would have defeated him, but he answers how she can tell all this to the boss. Then a driver with a crow and a red eye appears. Their appearance surprised Jwak very much. The driver went to Kashian and said that he had won and congratulated him on passing the test. The guy looked at him and asked if he was really that happy. The villain answers, of course, because now he is a real villager, and then our hero smiles saying, since he is a full-fledged resident, he can rest here for a while and falls unconscious. At this moment the driver catches him. At that time, our hero's sister arrived at Philadelphia National Airport, and immediately texted him about her arrival. But he did not respond. Then she thought that everything was fine with him, and went to the exit. At the entrance, she was met by a man from the company with a sign with her name on it, and she immediately noticed him. Then she thanked him that the man had personally come to meet her, and he asked her to address him by the name of Sean. He asks her if she would like to come and see the house first. He gladly accepts the offer and thanks for it, but he does not see anything wrong with it, since it is part of his duties. Then he asks about the manager, and what kind of person is he? Sean replies that he is a great person, loves his job, went on a business trip, will be back in 10 days. Then he adds if she is interested in something, let her ask, do not hesitate, he answered everything. She thanks for this and feels some relief and promises she will work hard. After that, we were transferred to the NS orphanage, where young Kashian told Jeff how he would become a psyker. But Jeff thought that the boy wanted to become a cool villain, but the guy answered him, those were dreams in his childhood. Next, Jeff decides to ask the boy why he wants to become a psyker, to which he responds to be on the side of good. But this made the man laugh and says that the boy still thinks like a child, and Kashian asks to explain to him why this is so. Then Jeff asks Kashian to listen carefully. Not all psychers are on the side of good, but the boy did not understand how it was, because they are all fighting villains? But Jeff did not know how to answer this. Then the boy asked who was on the side of good, not the villains? But Jeff did not answer this, thinking about something, after which he gave the answer, the one who is fighting for universal peace. And he praises him by putting his hand on his head. Let him appreciate what he has and remember, it is not always good that it seems so. In conclusion, he asked the boy to become the person who will do everything right. Someone started calling our hero by name, and he woke up from a dream. He notices how he is not at home and everywhere is a mess and a lot of different instruments. Then he gets up and asks where is he. Moros was glad that Kashian had finally woken up, and then he asked the spirit if he had called him. But Moros did not understand what was going on. Suddenly someone was surprised to enter the room, and it was the driver who thought he was still asleep. She looked at him with relief and Kashian looked at him without understanding anything. Meanwhile, in Lampas's office in Korea, where Kim Woo-chang was walking down the corridor. He knocked on the door and then walked in congratulatingly down on his discharge from the hospital. But in the end, he sees a depressed person in front of him, and Kim turns on the light. Then he asks, what was he doing here in the dark? But he does not answer yet, and then Kim turns to him again and he answers, his sword. His dear sword no longer works and bursts into tears. Kim does not understand what his older friend means. Dun replies, he seems to have lost his soul, the energy of life has left him. But the young psyker still doesn't understand what it's about, and Dun is sure that Bloodrain did something to him. It's definitely his handiwork. The guy hears Dun promising revenge and decides to just say nothing. We are transferred to the Wilson pub and the driver says that this is the best pub in Wilson. Inside, the driver and Cashin were sitting and celebrating his victory in the test. The villain congratulates him on passing the test and his recognition. The guy asks, could they go somewhere else? But the driver replies that he needs to help Je with sales, and then remembers that he has already punished everyone involved in the incident during testing and hopes that this is enough. Our hero remembers all these events and does not answer anything. Immediately after that he is served a magnificent steak, saying that it is at the expense of the institution. The guy was a little surprised and he decided to ask the outer, are they so generous to everyone here? Jiha answers, she has become the boss and needs to be insulted, after all, but our hero is amused by the fact that now he is the boss. The driver replies that of course he is the boss, he surpassed everyone else, and Cashin asks for the driver himself, but he decided to give up in advance. He had said earlier that he did not want to become one, while Ujehi's subordinate did not understand what was going on here, and Ujeha asked to bring his best steak. The driver continued to tell how he was being paid and there were zero problems with that. Then Cashin asked if the driver was his employer or something? But he asks to call it what he wants. It's just important to him that a strong and charismatic leader like him takes the position of boss in Vilzen. But Cashin does not think that the local residents will just take and agree to follow him. He is like an eyesore for them. But the driver is sure that they will change their minds and most importantly, that he believes in him. Since his opinion remains that way in the future, it will be right. At that moment, Cashin remembered Jeff's words that people fighting for the right cause are on the side of good. The right thing is not always what it seems to him, but do not stop striving to become a good person. After that, the driver remembers that their new boss does not have a villainous name and offers him Black Duckling, or Whoosh, and he also thought of another interesting nickname. But at that moment our hero says his name, Cashin. At that moment everyone fell silent and was very surprised. And then our hero thinks to himself, a top-class psyker named Cashin no longer exists. Now Cashin's name belongs to a villain who is taking revenge. The guy gets up at this moment and makes a conclusion. Now his villainous name is Cashin. The next day, our hero was standing on the roof of one of the buildings in Vilzen and remembered how he escorted his sister to America. Moros notices this and asks if the guy is worried about her. He hoped that nothing bad would happen, and then Moros asks if Cashin is going to settle in Vilzen to improve his skills. To which the guy replies, this is a great place, besides, there will be strong comrades nearby. But you can't leave them alone either. The more effort he makes, the stronger he will become, and if he uses his abilities more often, he will be able to control them better. Lampas Gla has the best place to train everywhere. It is possible that due to his potential, he managed to get 2 powers at once, which no one had previously been able to do. If all the skills are used correctly, then revenge will be fulfilled perfectly. Then they will be able to move on to the search for the sword of destruction that Jeff was looking for, Moros added. But the guy looked at the spirit without understanding what he was talking about, and then the spirit assumed that our hero had simply forgotten. We were returned to the Will Zone, where the guy stood on the roof and thought about everything that had happened and realized that he really had become the boss of the Will Zone. We were transferred to Sowa Girls High School in Kadam District. There was a heated discussion in one of the classes and Nain noticed it, after which she came up and asked to see it. They watched the news of the Will Zone in their area and she saw the one who saved her twice. The girls told how this villain became the boss of the Will Zone and he scares them already. But the older brother Nain will catch him soon, and asks not to be afraid. They remember how he caught that Bloodrain killer and how cool he is. But Nain did not listen to them and watched the news and remembered him, after which she wondered if he was the boss of Wilzone. Meanwhile, in Vilzon, 3 villains were arguing over the very news where the villains of the Vilzon of the Kadam district were raided, and it was better not to face them. The cleaners are in the first place, the Iron Mask is in the second, the driver is in the third place, the crow is in the fourth place, and Cashin is in the fifth. This rating infuriates the Black Hand, who did not understand who makes these ratings at all. Crash assumes that the Black Hand is angry because it didn't hit him, but he denies it and asks him. Crash tells him with complete pride how to be in 6th place. And then the Black Hand gets even more angry, saying that this rating is complete nonsense. Cutter agrees with this and further wonders why Cashin took the name of an S-rank psyker, and Crash is also interested in this. But the Black Hand did not understand what the difference was. Then they explained to him, this name belonged to one of the best psykers, but the Black Hand did not understand. Crash suspects how he doesn't break into anything at all, because he's called a villain, and the Black Hand goes berserk again, asking why he should know all the psykers by name, and is going to punch them for insulting them. Then the Cutter replies that Cashin recently died, he was killed for the murder of a colleague, at which point Crash believes that the guy chose this name because of superstition, and he heard something similar. The Black Hand is wondering what kind of superstition is this. Crash explains to him that if the villain takes the name of a dead psyker, he will have new powers, but the Black Hand considers this nonsense. He goes on to say that only a fool would do that, but Crash says that many people do it even at the bottom in the Wilzon. Then the Black Hand calls them all fools and Crash starts to get angry, saying one more thing and he's screwed, and then he'll see how he talks when he pulls out his filthy tongue, but the Cutter will calm them down, since they already have enough punishment. Then the Cutter thought about it and asked himself, did he choose this name by accident, or will he really be able to get a new power? Meanwhile, in the training room in the basement of the villa, our hero came out of the shower after training, saying that he had finally refreshed himself. Moro says he's been training a lot more than usual today, will his body hold up? But the guy asks him not to worry, he only does what he can, and his body is much stronger than before. After that moment, it changed and Moros looked at him and said nothing. At this time, someone knocks on the door asking if our hero is there and if it is possible to enter at all. The guy asked to wait a bit, as he was already walking, but he was stopped by Moros, who said that he was out of shape. Then the driver and Cashin walked down the corridor, and the first one asked if the guy was training for days on the fly. But he does not answer and says that he should get right to the point. The driver says that a meeting is coming soon. The guy asks if it is necessary to be present, and the driver answers of course, because he is their boss, after which the guy asks why it is being held. The driver tells how the prisoners escaped from the punishment cell and this is a real problem. He assumes that they are most likely moving to the start. Then we are transferred to the village of Puskin, where the local boss was surprised that these worthless failed the task and barely survived, but still had the courage to come here. It was Jwack and the rest of the villains whom she instigated, and as a result of which the man calls them rats. Soon, a girl with a cigarette in her hands mentioned that their leader had changed in their Vilzon and now the driver was a pain in the ass, which was no longer a problem. The boss gives them a week and orders them to make the Kadam area his. It was an S-rank villain named Barracuda, a class stiker and a fossil skill. Then we are returned to the driver and Cashin. The former boss told us that about 400 people live in the Kadam area. 100 of them are villains, the rest are homeless or rejected by society, although they get along together, but such a life is far from ordinary. Then we are transferred to a meeting in the village of Kadam district. Crow, Red Eye, Driver and Cashin were sitting at the table. The driver said they checked the trackers of those who escaped from the punishment cell. They are all in the startup area. Cashin asks, there are 4 Ratsons with Wilsons in Seoul, why did they choose this one? The driver replies, they have a counter with them, and then the guy wonders what they didn't share? The driver tells how they want to unite, but they will not understand his words that they do not need it. Next Cashin asks, is this the boss of Wilson Puskin, Barracuda? Red Eye confirms this and tells, an S-rank villain, a very aggressive and cunning personality. Cashin focuses on his rank and then the driver responds that it doesn't matter what rank he is, since he can't beat them. The only thing he can be proud of is a brass knuckles. They say it is with magic crystals, and this interested our hero. Further speaking, the clan outnumbers them. It's not even a matter of numbers. They have a lot of top-rank villains. Red Eyes says that if they want to attack, they will not win, and I am sure that this is their plan. The driver says, no matter how strong they are, they will not attack without confidence in victory, and then the crow will take his word. He suggests taking this confidence away from them, for example, to show that all the villains of their will zone can get out of control, to show how freedom-loving they are and how difficult they are to manage. Drive says that this has never happened before. You can try it, as long as it doesn't look too fake. Then he turns to the boss and says, besides, they have a secret weapon that started going somewhere, and the driver asked about it. Cashin replied that he was going home, but the meeting was not over yet, and after all, he was the boss, says the driver. But our hero says he has exams on his nose, it's time to study, and the driver lets him go, since there is no point in arguing. The crow was laughing, not understanding what exams the boss of Vilzen might have now, while Red Eye just looked and did not speak, not understanding the position of the new boss. Meanwhile, two trainee psychers met at the Starbucks cafe. One says they meet once every 6 months. Is it possible to call it normal? Kim answers, the problem is small, and he did not ignore his calls, and his interlocutor noticed that he did not try to call first. His interlocutor was a trainee psyker with no rank named Seo Jiho, a support class and the ability of psychokinesis. He said it was autumn, graduation was coming very soon, and asked what plans for the future. But Kim did not understand what Jiho meant and asked about it again. And then Uchin was asked directly whether he would continue to advance as a psyker or go to study. In parallel with their conversation, everyone looked at them and considered them real handsome. Someone even suggested that they were dating. The guys were talking about the future, and Kim, when asked about future plans, replied that he did not know yet. Uchwon would like to try himself in different fields, accumulate life experience. Jiho replies then he should have chosen not an ordinary high school, but a special training campus for psychers, as his father wished. After these words, Kim turned his gaze away and thought about his father, and Jiho notices this, after which he says if he, like his father, becomes an S-rank psycher, he will surpass him. But Uchin replies that he is not ready and explains that only 30 people in the whole world hold this title, and his goal is to become one of them. Next, he puts on a cup of coffee and adds, when he becomes one of the S-rank psychers, then he will be able to take revenge on him. Joha didn't say anything to this, and then decided to change the essence of the conversation a little, saying that top-rank psychers are usually very strong on their own, and they have well-developed abilities. A simple support like Joha cannot reach such a level. Kim replies that there is a support among the top-rank psychers and Joha knows about him and he is only one. But if Joha does not succeed, then Uchin's chances are much higher, says so. Then he mentions how Kim caught the villain, Bloodrain, and it's very amazing, but the guy didn't answer anything and remembered how he was defeated by that villain Cashin. Joha adds that everyone at school is trying to imitate him, and as soon as Uchin wanted to confess, a message from his sister came to his phone. He tells Joha about it and asks, does the sister want to meet him and does the guy want to go with him? Joha blushed a little and replied that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and asked why they were dating you. Uchin replies that he needs to buy a book, and in parallel to this cafe Cashin passes with Moros and the second one asks where they are going, to which the guy replies that he needs to buy a book. Meanwhile, in the Vizlin of the Puskin district, the boss was walking in the corridor of the punishment cell and someone to whom he was going spoke to the whole punishment cell for toys, for his cute toys. He wondered where they hid his treasures. Did they want to play hide and seek? The boss comes to this man who was tied up and his eyes are closed, and he asked who came to him. Did he really see his toys? The boss replies that he hid them, and then the villain, hearing that he hid them, replies that he will have to pay with his life for such games. Barracuda then replies that he will give him new ones and takes him by the face and adds that they are all in the Kadam district's Vilzen. This amused the villain very much when he heard behind the scenes, since his homeland is there. Then Barracuda asks if the villain remembers the driver. The villain replies that he is the great boss there, his friend, who wants to tear out his eyes, and then Barracuda tells him that the driver is no longer the boss there. This amused the villain even more, and after that they untie and order him to go there, as the busy toys are already waiting for him there. A little later that day, Min-young was standing on the street, who at that moment was called by Nain, shouting to her that she was here. Nain runs up to her friend and says she came too early. How long did she wait? Min-young replies that she just came up, but Nain notices how surprised she was that the girl dialed her from a new number. The girl then explains, after discharge, she changed it and remembers the events that happened to them, saying that she wants to forget about everything. After that, they went to the bookstore and Min-young asks where brother Nain is now. She answers, in the bookstore. Since they agreed to meet there, then Minin gives her friend a package with something and asks her to take it. It's a gift to her and Minin is shy to talk about it, but Nian does not understand why she gets such gifts. Min-young began to spin from embarrassment, and blushed, saying that this was in gratitude for her rescue, and Kim Naeung decided to just keep silent. After some time in the bookstore, Naeung was sniffing new books and rejoicing at their smell. Min-young watched this and asked what she was doing. Naeung replied to her just like she saw that she sniffed the new books because she adores their smell. Min-young heard this, took the book she was holding in her hands and decided to smell it to understand Nain, but did not understand anything in the end. After that, Naeung snapped somewhere saying that she wanted to buy a book here and asked to wait, but Min-young offered to go together. Min-young is interested in what kind of book we are talking about, and then Nain answers she talked about the cookbook. Her brother thought to buy it, but it is not for sale online. Min-young blushed and asked, does she want to buy a book on cooking for Uchin? The girl confirmed this and simultaneously searched for it on the shelf and abruptly finds it. Then she reaches out to take it, and a second before it, someone else intercepts the book. She turns around and asks to wait since she took it first, but the person who took the book does not understand this, since it is in his hands now. This man was Cashin, and the girl, looking at him for a second, lost her voice, and then our hero recognizes the girl, remembering that she is Kim Uchin's sister, and it was her he saved then. Then he looks behind Naeung at Min-young and sees how everything is fine with that girl. After that he gives the book asking Naeung to take it. She takes it and he immediately leaves. But the girls did not understand anything looking after him, and he talked with Moros, who was not going to help him with cooking tomorrow, and the guy asked him to calm down, as they will now ask the employee if there is still in the warehouse. The girls looked at him, and Min-young asked if Naeung knew him, but she shook her head in the negative. Naeung herself didn't say anything and just stared after him, but it was obvious that she was interested in him, as she felt something familiar. Meanwhile, we're on the street of the city near the store who was hitting the trash, and it was those same hooligans from school, and the blonde man was hitting the trash while the bespectacled man looked at him and laughed, saying, alone with himself, he was definitely having fun. Their leader was silent and then suddenly said how bored he was and how he longed for the old days, and then the bespectacled man asked what was bothering him now. Suddenly someone asked them if they were bored, maybe they wanted to be amused. A man in a hat and with a large scarf around his neck stands in front of them. The hooligans were scared and asked in fright who he was at all. The unknown man takes out a large gift box and says how he will give them a gift. They are so cute, they need to be amused. Then he asked what they are afraid of. The hooligans immediately realize that this man is a villain, which they asked him about. Then the villain notices their unwillingness to receive a gift and says they can refuse. They immediately refuse, but the villain responds to them, there is nothing funny about refusals. He said this. He uses the gift time skill and puts a gift box on the head of the leader of the hooligans with the words how he is sure they will like it. The others watched and trembled when they saw what had become of their leader. The box became a part of him like a head, and it looked terrible like a zombie. The villain also told them to watch, since their friend had become a cute toy, and then offered them to play too. This is an A-rank villain named Puppeteer. His class was a generator, and his skill was chaos, which he came to give to this area. Meanwhile, in the bookstore, Nain meets his brother saying that they are here, after which he asks why they are here, although they could have gone to a cafe. She replied that she wanted to buy a book in parallel. Min Young blushed when she saw Nayoung's brother, and Jiho blushed when he saw Uchin's sister. Uchin asked what book she wanted to buy, and then she shows the cooking book, saying he was looking for it. Her brother thanks her, although he thinks that it was not worth the expense. Jiho is surprised that Uchin cooks at all, and he replies that this is his hobby. Jiho has not seen anyone given books on cooking before. Then Uchin pays attention to Min Young and asks if he is feeling better. The girl answers him that everything is fine, and Nain decides to give the package with a gift to her brother from Min Young. While the girl favored her brother, Nain turned her attention away. Our hero was standing there and was interested in the cookery book that Nain gave him, but he was answered, this book remained in a single copy, no more. Then the guy was puzzled, and suddenly everyone hears some strange sound. Both young psychers immediately wondered what it was. At this moment, Uchin notices something along with Cashin, and our hero shouts for them all to lie down. Then an explosion occurs and knocks out the windows. Uchin covered his sister, and did not understand what was happening, after which he saw at the end of the book a man with a box on his head. It was the head of the hooligans. Meanwhile, in the Vilzen, the driver was sitting at home and making something while watching the news. He also thought for the boss and his exams, which would definitely occupy him for some time. At this moment, breaking news is being broadcast on the news. Right now they are being informed that people in gift boxes have appeared in the Kadam shopping district. The police suspect that this is the work of a villain. Now they will contact their reporter from the scene. The driver emphasized the people in the boxes, and suddenly a crow appeared asking what they were broadcasting about. She looks at the screen where people are shown and says, very familiar boxes. It seems that this is the same villain, the man who escaped 3 years ago. Meanwhile, in the bookstore, one of their people attacked the psychers and our hero. Jiho looked at him and assumed that he was a villain, but still something was wrong. Suddenly the possessed man releases toys from a box on his head that attacked the psychers. They easily coped with it, but miss one toy that flew straight at Nain. The girl did not know what to do and were very scared, but our hero saves them by hitting the toy with a book. Naeung thanks him, and he didn't just stand silently and stare at the toy, after which it suddenly dissolves, and the possessed became more distraught. Jiho shouts at everyone to be careful, because something might come out of the box again. Uchin rushes forward with the words that he will neutralize him, and asks another psyker to cover the others. Jiho heard him and took the order. Uchkin attacked the enemy with the thought that he should destroy all the villains, but someone abruptly stops him and asks if he really wants to kill a person. This man was Cashin, who talked about how he was being controlled. He was just a puppet in the hands of a villain, while Nain looked at our hero and silently watched him. Jiho did not believe that this was a puppet, and in his mind he thought, how does this person know this? Cashin remembers the words of Tufin Schiller and tells them to young psychers. For all psychers, the safety of civilians is paramount. Consider what is happening from different angles and only then act. Uchin looked at him in surprise, not understanding how he knew one of their rules. At that moment, he is attacked by a puppet, and Cashin shouts at him why he is staring at him and let him look ahead. Uchin immediately came to his senses after these words and dodged the attack, and then Jiho enters the battle. Uchin does not touch the puppet. Jiho gathers strength for his skill and thinks if he is not a villain, but a controlled person, then he can save him. As a result, he uses the recovery skill directly on the puppet. A person gets on this skill and the box on his head starts to disappear, after which he falls unconscious and Jiho asks if he succeeded. Minin tells the young psycher how cool he is and Nain looks at the person. After that Cashin comes up and tells them to look and make sure that this is an ordinary person, as he said. This man turned out to be the leader of the school bullies. Jiho looked at him and said how his powers returned the man to a normal state, which was confirmed by Nain. When our hero saw the bully, he went crazy and threw a book in his face, and Nain screamed and asked what he was doing. At that moment, Uchin stood silently and thought how his programmer could have killed a man if not for that guy. At that time, the city was in chaos and many people were in these boxes. They attacked other citizens using toys from the boxes. At the center of the action was the villainous puppeteer, who laughed and said how he saw everyone was delighted. Suddenly he felt something and says that someone offended his toy, they should be punished for it, and promises to find these guys. Suddenly, he is told that he will not find anyone, and it was the driver sitting behind the villain. The puppeteer was amused to recognize the driver's voice. The same one reminds him how he warned the villain, if he pokes into their area again, he will not leave him alone. Did this make the puppeteer laugh a lot, and did he think it was funny to say that he was hoping to intimidate him with his babbling? Then he went crazy saying how glad he was to see them again. His eyes, shiny and beautiful eyes, he would scratch out with his own hands. After that, he attacked the driver, laughing at the same time. The driver stood up and prepared. As soon as the puppeteer approached, the driver hit him with his mechanical weapon and he disappeared, because it would be a substitution. Then the driver, watching him evaporate, says how annoying he is. He is not at all happy to meet them, since he pisses him off terribly. At that time, the news was broadcast in the village of Puksan district. Right now their correspondents are reporting a strange incident in the Kadam district. The police have already gone to the scene of action. The one who watched this news considered this situation to be a backup, and it was the boss of Wilson Barracuda. He said that it was necessary to prepare better for the opening, so that the guys from Kadam liked it, and 4 of his henchmen stood next to him. One of them was an A rank named Rahand. The class was Striker and the smart ones were Fossils. He asked, "Can't they just destroy them?" On the side someone laughed, and it was an A rank villain named the Ice Devil. The class was enlightened and the skill was cold. He said he would agree if they let him freeze them all. Barracuda told them to do what they want. The main thing is not to touch the driver, since he is his prey. The woman laughed at this, saying that he took the most delicious, and then she asked if she should take care of the crow. It was an A rank villainess named Smoker. Her class was enlightened and her skills were good. The woman was interested. She had been dreaming about a chicken for a long time and wanted to know what kind of crow would taste like. There was another villain standing in front of the boss, who asked if he could also choose a target. Barracuda allowed him to say who he wanted and immediately assumed that he wanted someone who was also connected to the darkness. This villain replies that he is interested in Cashin, and he himself was an A rank named Black Demon. His class was an assassin and his mind was darkness. The Smoker says that this is an unexpected statement, and Barracuda mentions that he is the new boss of Vilzen after all, but it's his business, for which the villain thanks. The Smoker asks what to do with the puppeteer now, to which Barracuda replies that they only need him for a grand opening, but in general, at least they will get rid of unnecessary ballast. The woman thinks this is cruel, and then the boss adds, smiling at the same time, this time the Vilzen Kadama will pass into his hands. Meanwhile, in Kadama, the riots staged by the puppeteer continue and one of the puppets attacks people, but suddenly she is attacked by Jiho with her recovery, and screams how they saved these. It was already the 3rd person saved. Uchin says how there will be more of them if they do not find the main culprit, but Jiho asks him to wait, since it is dangerous. They have already informed the headquarters, they just need to wait. But Uchin replies he can do something worse, they do not have time. Then Jiho asks if Uchin knows the criminal. He confirms this by answering, the puppeteer is a famous psycho, he read about him in the recordings of Wilson Kadam. Then he imagines him and adds how he will do everything for his own pleasure. At this time, our hero is looking at the phone from a distance and Moros is interested in what is written there. The guy says that the driver sent a message and writes that a villain named Puppeteer is behind what is happening. Moros notices, apparently, a dangerous kid, since he was told about him, and then Cashin assumes that he is somewhere nearby. Then he starts turning his head and decides to get out of here as soon as possible. Moros agrees, since there are too many people here. Then they try to disappear unnoticed, but Nain notices them and calls to them, asking him to wait, and not understanding where he is going, he replies that he is going home. She says it's dangerous to walk alone now, and offers to go with them. Minin confirms this and adds, it's safer with them, since Brother Nain is a pacemaker. The guy didn't answer anything and didn't know how to get rid of them, but Moro says the plan to disappear unnoticed failed, which upset the guy very much. Suddenly, he notices a puppeteer behind the girls, who decides to put boxes on them. He shouted to them to be careful and grabs them with incredible speed and dodges the villain with them. The girls were shocked and Nain herself was surprised looking at our hero. At that second 2 young psychers noticed this, and were surprised by the guy's speed and immediately ran to their aid. But the puppeteer stands in front of them with the words, "That's who offends his toys," and it makes him very angry. The guys recognize the villain and Uchkin says how not to look for him, since he came to them himself and this pleases the villain, whom they know. He decides to reward them for their knowledge. Next, he takes out a box with words, "A special gift for special guys," then he runs with the box in his hands right at the psychers with words, "This is a very rare gift." Uchin does not hesitate and uses his flash to meet him, but the villain is not offended, and he throws the box right at them laughing at the same time. A water toy jumps out of the box and neutralizes the fire and touches Uchkin. His sister was very worried about her brother. He was nailed to the wall, and as soon as he opened his eyes, a puppeteer appeared in front of him with another gift in his hands. As soon as he was about to throw a gift at him, laughing while someone's phone flies into the back of his head. This angered the villain and he screams and asks who is stopping him from having fun? But abruptly returns attention to Uchkin, who immediately gathered himself and decides to hit the villain with a fiery fist. As a result, it comes out and the puppeteer gets in the face. Uchkin, when he beat him against the background of everything, did not notice how he shouted that he had to destroy all the villains from the face of the earth, and as a result of the blow, the villain flies off a few meters, hitting the ground a couple of times. Uchin, on the other hand, looks at the phone that someone threw and immediately recognized it. Since he was familiar with this phone, it was his phone. Cashin at this point asks if Moros saw what just happened. He confirms this and they look at Nain, who abandoned him then. It was then that Cashin noticed something in her, a certain power like a psyker, and then he realized she had not gone far from her brother. Then all Cashin, Uchin and Jihun notice how the puppeteer disappears and starts laughing loudly. It was his double, and he stood aside and watched. He comes up to the guys and asks, "So which one of them is bad here?" "Oh, they shouldn't have touched his toys." "Well, it's okay, he has plenty of them." At the same time, he was gathering strength and a box appeared in his hands for a new attack. At this time, Lee Dun comes running to the Korean branch of Lampas and asks for forgiveness. He urgently needed to go to the bathroom. A certain woman meets him and answers, "Poor Uchin, he probably suffered from such a mentor as Dun." Then they get into the car and Dun asks, "Do you have a new car?" And stitches her cool, "She's evil," orders him to quickly get in the car and shut his mouth. Then they drove to the scene of the incident, and the woman told them, in the center of Rayon Kadam Ko 0 what happened. This is a densely populated area. The longer they do not settle the incident there, the more victims there are. It was an A-rank psyker named Hem Jason. The class was a striker, and the skill was physics. Dun asks her if Gift Man or the puppeteer has turned up again. The woman asks him in response, "Did he just understand now?" And after that, he mentions how his partner Kim Yukin is also there. It scared Dun very much, who started sparring Yukin at the scene and all alone. But Jason replies that the psyker with Jaiso is with him. Then Dun says that we need to call him and find out the situation. Jason asks him to tell them to wait for him in a safe place. There is no need to take any more risks, as there was with Bloodrain. This case seems very strange. Nothing has been heard from him for 3 years. And suddenly he showed up, says Ham Jason. He further adds that the puppeteer cannot control himself. It is strange that he hid for so long and came when he got bored. Dun agrees with this and does not think that everything is so simple. Then the woman notices, in general, something strange is happening in the Wilsons all over the country, as if someone is deliberately provoking conflicts between them, while Dun is interested in what could be the benefit. Then Jason replies the benefit will be for the one who absorbs the rest of the Wilsons. Then Dun starts to get hysterical that Uchin's phone is not working, and the puppeteer's friend did something to him. Jaiso strongly pisses Dun off with his vision, and tries not to break off, saying that he just calm down and call back. He dials and it doesn't help. Then he starts to get hysterical, even more worried about his partner, and suddenly he got hurt. But the woman is annoyed and she yells at him to calm down, calling him a fool. Meanwhile, they show us the drone that they saw above our hero and the others. Then they show the puppeteer's box, who laughed. Then the number of boxes went away and the villain says how they will have fun with them all night until they get tired of playing to death. Then he launches all these boxes at Uchin. but he manages to dodge all the boxes by knocking them down in parallel, but toys jump out of the broken boxes. After that, they all get on Uchkin and start hugging him. The puppeteer shouts to him, "This unique object is designed specifically for him. Very soon he will become his best toy," and then begins to laugh. Kim Uchin begins to grab more and more toys and boxes of the villain. Meanwhile, Cashin turns to Jiho, calling him Blue Hair, and says what he stands for: let him use his power on Uchin. Jiho immediately came to his senses and begins to act. The villain realized who had not paralyzed his toys. Then Jiho uses recovery on Uchin. As a result, all the toys disappear. The villain, watching his toys disappear one by one, gets angry and screams at Jiho, saying that he should not dare to touch his toys. At this moment, Uchin pushes the villain in the back with his whole body and he flies into the wall, immediately followed by blows from the psyker, but the villain manages to react to each and dodge. After that, he grabs the guy by the jacket and says how he caught him laughing at the same time and calls him his super rare item. The young psyker begins to tremble and suffocate while the puppeteer was telling him that it would be an honor for him to become his toy and begins to laugh. At this moment, a shadow sword is stabbed into the wall near them and shadow bonds appear from it. As a result, they embrace the villain, who did not understand anything of what was happening. Kim Yukin does not waste time and gathers strength in his fist to strike, but the villain screams in despair. Who dares to touch his toys? Next, the guy delivers a crushing blow to the villain, and he, losing his creation, flies off a couple of meters. After the battle, Uchin checks his throat and Jiho runs up to him, but the young psyker noticed the sword from the shadow and immediately realized that Cashin had helped him again. The driver watched all this from the roof, did not understand how to react to it, but decides to pretend that he did not see it. The next day, Uchin was in his apartment and watched the news where it was said about yesterday's incident after lunch in Kadam district. The studio host and psyker Ham Jason were sitting there. The host was asking, "It is confirmed that the puppeteer is the villain and the culprit in the incident, right?" The woman confirms this. Many civilians were injured because of him and the infrastructure of the area was destroyed. Then the presenter asks the following question: has crime become more frequent in Kadam lately? What is the difference in her opinion? Jason replies, the Wilsons prove that villains are socially adapted to a certain extent. Also, cities that have a vill zone show a lower level of criminal incidents. All the villains guilty of crimes were not in the Wilsons, which proves the negative result of such an omission. The presenter understands and asks, then what can he offer as a solution to this problem? She thinks it's worth working on the Wilson system. If it weren't for the psychers, everything could have ended in a more terrible tragedy. The host confirms this and tells how he heard that psychers Kim Yukin and Seo Jiho performed well in this battle. Then he goes on to say, in general, Kim Yukin is actively involved in many recent events. What does Jason think about it? She replies, he is a rising star of the Korean branch of Lampas. Many would like to accelerate his career advancement. Kim Yukin, on the other hand, does not turn off the TV and remembers how immediately after defeating the puppeteer, Lee Dung praised him and said how proud he really was that he was his partner, and thought that his training could be considered successfully completed. Then it drove the guy crazy and he even bared his teeth thinking that now Cashin had done everything. Then he wonders why the villain saves people, what are his goals, what is he trying to achieve? And to all this, he picks up the phone with the rating of villains of the Vilzon of the Kadam district, and wonders why Cashin. Cashin is an S-rank psyker, and in general a very famous hero for the whole world, was killed for the murder of his comrade. Why did he take his name? Meanwhile, in Vizlan, Royal Gannett says they have problems. In parallel, his retinue of girls ate cookies. He continues to tell, through the media, someone is encouraging the dissolution of the Kadam Vilzon and the driver responds, let them try. Gannett explains that if so, then Vilzon will not be allowed to sit still, they will want to take them to themselves. And Otto adds that this is literally a declaration of war, but he considers it scary. The driver asks about the other villas in Seoul, are they all silent? Gannett confirms this, suggesting that they are probably still monitoring the situation, but sooner or later they will come for them. The driver says, in other words, they all know that what happened was planned, and they were used as scapegoats. Further understanding all this, he asks the question, does their Vilzone seem so weak? Gannett immediately replies that he is always ready to offer a helping hand, but not for free of course. But the driver took it as a mockery and replied, there are no options for Gannett, he should help, but they have a secret weapon. Gannett immediately realizes that this is about their new boss, but why is it secret? Aroma tries to find him by scent, but can't even find him by smell. Otto finds it annoying. Then the driver tells them that he is busy with exams now. It seems that he should be free soon, so he does not have time yet. All three are at a loss. What kind of exams are we talking about in such a situation? Meanwhile, at Kadam High School, our hero stood on the roof and told how everything was fine with him, how well he was eating and his health was in order, and he was eating a burger. He was talking to his sister on the phone, and she was asking how he could not worry at all. Just yesterday, did you see what happened to them? Was he near the scene of the accident? Cashin told her not to worry, he was studying at home, preparing for exams, and Moros silently watched this dialogue. Then the sister, having heard about the exams, is interested in when he has them? He replies that tomorrow and he is preparing for them. She immediately asks if he is definitely studying well, and immediately warns that just let him try to get to and get it from her. Cashin replies that he studies diligently, and his grades are good, and she is glad to hear that, saying that efforts are important, and she wants to see an excellent result. At the same time, Cashin notices how Kim Uchin approached him and tells his sister that it's time for him to go. He will dial her later. She agrees and wishes him good luck in the exams. After that, he puts down the phone and the two guys looked at each other. Our hero was waiting for Kim Uchin's words, since he did not know why he came, and Uchin says how he has a conversation with Kwon Kong. At this time, on the other side of the phone, my sister was walking down the corridor of the restaurant and thinking about talking to her brother. Maybe he was worried so much, and she was pushing him with grades. After that, she thinks to tell him where the stash is in the house and let him eat well with this money. Suddenly, someone calls Yuri, and it was Sean, who was looking for her and called a lot of times. She apologized for this, as she was talking on the phone, and immediately asked if something had happened during her absence. But Sean calms her down and tells her that their director just returned from a business trip and said that he would personally like to see her. She was a little surprised by this news, and then Sean took her to the principal's office. She asked permission to enter the office, where the director himself was standing at the window, and heard her enter. Sean introduced the young girl, saying, "This is the manager, Kwon Yuri." She thought, "Is this the director?" The director apologizes for calling her so suddenly. Coming up and holding out his hand, he finishes, "After all, the hour is already late." She looked at him in surprise, and he said, although it is late, he is glad to meet them, and introduces himself. His name is Vincent. At this time, Cashin met with Kim Woo Chang and asked him what he wanted to talk to him about. The psyker gathered his thoughts by closing his eyes and then opened and said words of gratitude for yesterday. Without Cashin they would not have survived. Our hero was thinking, did he really come just to thank you? Recalling yesterday, Uchin says despite the danger of the situation, he helped, risking his own life. He acted like a psyker, Kwon Kong. Then he holds out the package, saying, "And here's another thing." Cashin is interested in what it is and what is inside in general. It was a gift from Uchwon's sister as a thank you for his help, after which he decides to say bluntly, she gives the guy a gift for the first time. In parallel, he squeezes the handles of the package. And since this is her first gift to the guy, so he asks to accept it and gives the package. After that he turns around and is about to leave, but suddenly remembers something. He decides to ask Cashin about it. By the way, did he see the guy in the black suit yesterday? But our hero did not answer anything, decided to show that he did not understand, and then Uchin looked at him and abruptly left with the words that he forgot about this question and wished good luck on the exam. Moros is interested in the contents of the package, which he asks about. Then Cashin offers to look at what was inside. Surprised the guy. There was a cooking book that he had previously given to Nain. After a while, some work was carried out in the Vilzon of the Kadam district, which the driver observed, saying that barricades were installed here, which one of the villains took over. The driver asked to make it in the best possible way. Then he told another villain he would still need to set traps in front of them, and the one to whom he was telling this asked him if he should dig a trench, if so, how deep? The crows stood nearby and crowded, then asked if the guys from Puskin would really come. The driver confirms this, and that's why they are preparing a greeting for the guests, as if for the beginning of the war. At this moment, Cashin arrives and the driver immediately asks how his exams are. Strangely, he was released earlier, but our hero remained silent. Then he noticed how the villains were working hard using their skills and asked the driver what they were doing, why all this. He replies that they are preparing to repel the attack, and the guy clarifies, the attack of the guys from Puxin? The crow confirms this by calling him a cute word silly. The driver adds that they are so strong, but with this it will be easier to win. Then our hero leaves again and the driver asks where he is going? Cashin told him that he was going to see Jiha. The driver was puzzled and asked two questions. Was he really drinking early in the morning? Was everything so bad at the exam? The crow suggests that the driver follow his example, he and she, as in the good old days. After a while, in the pub of Je, who asked our hero again, he wants to buy mana crystals of the highest class and how much? The guy answers him, everything that can be obtained. Then the outer thought about it, and warned, it will cost very much, and Cashin immediately asked the question, how much? Outer silently looked at him, thinking about something, and soon they moved to the warehouse, where he gives him 5 crystals of the highest quality, but the guy expected more. Then Jiha explains, another client bought out almost the entire batch, these are the remnants. Then Cashin asks the price of the question. Jiha hands the envelope to the EMC, replying that everything is written in the contract. He thinks Cashin knows that they are very rare, but there is a special significantly low price for him. But the guy offers him another 20% discount, and it's done. But Jiho is a little mad and tries to restrain himself by saying that this is a dubious offer. The guy immediately changes his offer and says, then sell him 5 for the price of 4. Then Jiho starts to get even more furious, but restrains himself, laughing and almost insulting him. As a result, he agrees, but asks for payment in cash. Then Cashin asks him to give him his account. In parallel, he remembered something. He told Moros at home how he had a secret account in the name of Cashin in a Swiss bank, and then the spirit assumes that this is a rainy day loan. Cashin confirms this by saying that Jeff told him to do so. In parallel, he enters the given bank and account. As a result, he manages to log into a secret account, and Moros is very surprised by the amount of money in this account and tells Cashin about it. Cashin, on the other hand, is dying, saying that if he had known that everything would be like this, he would have transferred all his money here. Then Moros asks what he will do with all this money. Our hero replies that he will spend them on investing in his strength, which he is currently doing. Jiho BLV thanks him for the deal and asks him to come back. As soon as our hero has left, Jiho decides to look at the phone. There he sees the transfer of money from a secret account, and wonders who he really is.